My wife looked me dead in the eye and told me I was nothing more than a bank account while her daughter laughed in my face. She said I had no right to demand respect in the house I paid for. She thought I was just a quiet old man who would take the abuse to keep the peace. She was wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I just smiled, finished my dinner, and went to bed. But while they were popping champagne to celebrate their victory over the old man, I was already on the phone with my lawyer. The next morning, they woke up to a reality where the credit cards didn't swipe, the cars were gone, and the locks were changed. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled their entire world in less than 24 hours, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been the only person paying the bills, but the last person getting any respect. I want to know I am not alone in this. My name is Marcus Thorne, and at 73 years old, I thought I had seen everything. I grew up in Atlanta when a black man had to keep his head down to survive. I started my construction business with a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and a back that didn't know the meaning of the word quit. I built skyscrapers. I built hospitals. I paved the roads these ungrateful children drive their luxury cars on. But nothing I faced on those brutal construction sites prepared me for the cold, sharp knife of betrayal at my own dining table. It was Tuesday evening, the night of Chloe's 24th birthday. The air in the dining room was heavy with the scent of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, a table I had crafted with my own hands 30 years ago, long before Vanessa and her daughter Chloe entered my life. The chandelier above us cast a golden glow over the crystal wine glasses, shimmering with the $300 vintage Cabernet I had pulled from the cellar for this special occasion. I looked around the table. To my right sat Vanessa, my wife of 5 years. At 50, she was still a striking woman draped in a silk emerald dress that I had bought her for our anniversary. She was swirling her wine, looking everywhere but at me. To my left sat Chloe, her daughter. She was glued to her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen, barely acknowledging the food or the company. And next to her was Brad, her husband of 6 months. A 26-year-old boy with soft hands who liked to use words like synergy and leverage but had never leveraged a hammer in his life. The conversation had been superficial all night. They talked about vacations in the Hamptons, new art galleries opening downtown, and the latest gossip from the country club. I was silent. I was used to being silent. In this house, my voice was usually only required when a check needed to be signed or a contractor needed to be yelled at to fix the pool heater. Finally, the moment came for gifts. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I had spent weeks thinking about this. I didn't want to buy her another purse or a pair of shoes she would wear once. I wanted to give her a future. Inside that envelope was a deed to a diversified investment portfolio I had started for her worth $25,000, along with a matured savings bond. It was a foundation. It was security. "Happy birthday, Chloe," I said, my voice raspy from years of breathing in concrete dust. I slid the envelope across the polished wood. "I hope this helps you and Brad build something real." The room went quiet. Chloe put down her phone. She picked up the envelope with 2 fingers as if it might be contaminated. She ripped it open, not with excitement, but with an air of boredom. She pulled out the documents. Her eyes scanned the numbers. I waited for a smile. I waited for a thank you. I waited for a sign that she understood the value of money earned through sweat and blood. Instead, she let out a short, sharp laugh. She tossed the papers back onto the table like they were junk mail. "Is this a joke?" she asked, looking at her mother. I blinked, confused. "It is an investment portfolio, Chloe. It is $25,000. In 10 years, if you manage it right, it could be—" "Stop!" She cut me off, holding up a manicured hand. "25,000. Marcus, seriously, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Brad is in the middle of closing a seed round for his startup. We are talking about $2 million in venture capital. This is pocket change." I felt a heat rising up my neck. Pocket change. That pocket change was more than my father made in 5 years of picking cotton. "It is money that grows, Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is real money, not promised money from investors." "Real." Brad chuckled. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, looking at me with that pitying look that made my blood boil. "Look, Marcus, we appreciate the gesture, really," Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But the economy has changed. You possess a very old-school blue-collar mindset. In our world, 25 grand doesn't even cover the marketing budget for a launch week. We are operating at a different level. We don't need your little rainy day fund. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white against my dark skin. I looked at Vanessa. Surely she would say something. Surely she would tell her daughter to show some respect to the man who paid for her college, her wedding, and the roof over her head. "Vanessa," I said softly. Vanessa sighed. She took a long sip of her wine and set the glass down with a sharp clink. "Don't look at me like that, Marcus," she said coldly. "Chloe is right. You are embarrassing her. You hand her this envelope like you are the savior of the family, but you just don't get it. You are out of touch." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I leaned forward. "Out of touch?" I asked. "I am the only one at this table who has actually worked for the food we are eating. I am the only one here who knows what it costs to keep the lights on." "Oh, please," Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. "There you go again, the struggling martyr act. We get it, Marcus. You worked hard. You laid bricks. You are a hero. But let's be honest, you are just the wallet. You are the bank account we have to tolerate. So don't sit there and try to lecture me about finance when you barely know how to use an iPhone." The disrespect hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was contempt. Pure, unadulterated contempt. I looked at Brad. He was smirking. I looked at Chloe. She was looking at her mother for approval. And then I looked at Vanessa, the woman I had promised to cherish. "You agree with this?" I asked her, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You agree that I am just a wallet?" Vanessa adjusted her diamond earrings I had bought her last Christmas. "Marcus, let's not make a scene," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "You have to understand the dynamic here. Brad comes from a very prominent family. Chloe is educated. They have a certain cultural standard. You are rough around the edges. You provide the resources and we provide the lifestyle. That is the arrangement. Don't try to be her father. She has a father and he was a gentleman. You are just the provider. So don't correct her. Stay in your lane." The room went silent again. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the beating of my own heart. Stay in my lane. I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years I had told myself they were just adjusting, that they loved me in their own way, that Vanessa was just stressed, that Chloe was just young. But tonight the veil was lifted. I saw them for what they were, parasites. They didn't see a husband or a stepfather. They saw a resource to be mined until it was dry. They expected me to explode. They expected the angry black man to flip the table, to yell, to give them a reason to call the police or paint me as the villain. I saw it in Brad's eyes. He was ready to play the victim. But I had negotiated million-dollar contracts with sharks who would eat Brad for breakfast. I knew that in a negotiation, the person who speaks first loses, and the person who shows emotion is dead. I took a deep breath. I let the anger flow through me and out the other side, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. It was over. The marriage, the support, the illusion of family. It was all dead. I picked up my knife and fork. I looked down at the medium-rare lamb chop on my porcelain plate. I cut a piece deliberately and slowly. The knife scraped against the china, a harsh sound that made Brad flinch. I put the meat in my mouth and chewed slowly. I savored the flavor. I reached for my wine glass and took a sip. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and placed it gently on the table. Then I stood up. I looked at Chloe. I smiled, a genuine calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You are absolutely right, Chloe," I said softly. Chloe blinked, surprised by my surrender. Yes, I continued. "And you too, Vanessa. I have been stepping out of my lane. I have been trying to force a relationship that clearly isn't there. I apologize. I understand my position now." Vanessa relaxed, a look of triumphant smugness washing over her face. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had put the old dog back in his kennel. "Good, Marcus," Vanessa said, picking up the wine bottle to refill her glass. "I am glad we could have this talk. Now let's enjoy the dessert. The chef made that raspberry tart you like." "No, thank you," I said. "I am full. I think I will turn in early. I have a very busy day tomorrow." I pushed my chair in. I walked past Brad, who didn't even bother to look up. I walked past Chloe, who was already back on her phone, probably texting her friends about how she put her stepdad in his place. I walked past Vanessa, who was already laughing at something Brad said. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway lined with photos of them. trips I paid for, graduations I sponsored, and up the stairs to the master bedroom. I closed the door and locked it. The silence of the bedroom was comforting. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt light. The burden of 5 years of trying to please people who hated me had just evaporated. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my phone. It was 8:30 in the evening. My lawyer Reggie would be at home watching the game. Reggie and I had been friends for 40 years. He knew where every body was buried. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Marcus." Reggie's booming voice came through. "You watching the Falcons game?" "No, Reggie," I said, walking over to the window. I looked down at the driveway. I saw Chloe's Mercedes G-Wagon. I saw Vanessa's Porsche. I saw the landscaped garden. "I need you to open the file, Reggie." There was a pause on the other end of the line. The playfulness vanished from Reggie's voice. "The file? You mean the Doomsday file? Are you sure, Marcus? Once we pull that trigger, there is no going back." I watched through the glass as the dining room lights cast long shadows on the lawn. I could see their silhouettes moving, toasting, celebrating. They had no idea that the roof over their heads was already burning. "I am sure," I said. "Execute everything. The cars, the cards, the tuition, the housing trust. I want it all gone by tomorrow morning." "Understood," Reggie said. "I will make the calls tonight. By sunrise, you will be a stranger to them." I hung up the phone. I took a shower, washing off the stench of their expensive cologne and their cheap insults. I put on my favorite silk pajamas. I lay down in the bed that I had paid for in the house that I had built. I slept like a baby. Downstairs, the party continued. I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter. Let them laugh. Let them enjoy the last few hours of their fantasy. Because when the sun comes up, they are going to find out exactly what happens when the wallet closes and the man stands up. They wanted me to stay in my lane. Well, I was about to bulldoze the entire highway. The sun hadn't even fully risen over the Atlanta skyline when I sat down at the corner booth of a small, grimy diner on the south side of the city. It was 7 in the morning. The air smelled like bacon grease and old coffee, a smell that reminded me of my father. A smell that felt more like home than the $4 million mausoleum I had slept in for the last 5 years. Across from me sat Reggie. He didn't look like a high-powered attorney in that moment. He looked like my oldest friend wearing a faded Falcons cap and stirring his black coffee with a plastic spoon. Between us sat a single laptop, its screen glowing in the dim light. Reggie looked at me, his eyes searching for any sign of hesitation. He knew what I was about to do. He knew that with one click I wasn't just cutting off funds, I was declaring war. He knew that I still loved Vanessa, or at least the idea of who I thought she was. But he also knew that Marcus Thorne didn't tolerate disrespect. "Are you ready, Marcus?" he asked quietly. "Once I execute the freeze, the notifications start going out. Banks, dealerships, the university, the club. It's going to be a domino effect. There is no pause button." I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and hot, just the way I liked it. I thought about the dinner last night. I thought about Chloe's laughter. I thought about Vanessa telling me to stay in my lane. "Hit it," I said. Reggie tapped the enter key. It was such a small sound for something so destructive. Click. That was it. The digital guillotine had dropped. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app connected to the cameras at the house. I wasn't going to be there to see the fireworks in person, but I wasn't going to miss the show. I wanted to see the moment reality crashed into their fantasy world. On the small screen, I saw the morning routine beginning at the mansion. It was 7:30. The delivery driver from the organic juice bar pulled up. Every morning, Vanessa ordered a $50 kale and ginger smoothie and a catastrophic amount of overpriced pastries. I watched as she opened the front door in her silk robe, looking like the queen of the manor. She reached for the bag, smiling that fake smile she reserved for the help. She tapped her platinum card on the driver's mobile terminal. I zoomed in. I saw the driver frown. He tapped the machine again. Vanessa laughed a dismissive little wave of her hand, probably telling him it was a glitch. She tapped again. Then the color drained from her face. The driver shook his head and pulled the bag back. He wasn't giving her the goods. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. Account frozen. I could see her mouth moving, arguing, pointing at the house as if the bricks themselves were proof of her solvency. But the driver didn't care about bricks. He cared about the approval code, and there wasn't one. He got back in his van and drove away, leaving my wife standing on the porch, empty-handed and confused. That was the appetizer. The main course arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. I watched a massive flatbed tow truck back into the driveway. It wasn't one of those polite roadside assistance vehicles. This was a repo truck, a beast of a machine with chains and hooks that rattled like the ghosts of bad decisions. The noise must have woken the whole house. I saw the lights flick on in the upstairs windows. The driver, a big guy who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast, jumped out. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He went straight for the Mercedes G-Wagon. That SUV was Chloe's pride and joy. It was the symbol of her status, the chariot she used to drive around town looking down on people. And now it was being hooked up like a piece of scrap metal. The front door flew open. Chloe came running out barefoot, wearing oversized pajamas, her hair a mess. She was screaming. I couldn't hear the audio through the camera, but I knew exactly what she was saying. She was screaming about her rights. She was screaming that her stepfather was Marcus Thorne. She was screaming that he was making a mistake. The driver didn't even look up. He secured the chains around the axle of the Mercedes. Then Brad came running out, trying to look tough in his boxer shorts. He got in the driver's face, pointing a finger, puffing out his chest. The driver just stood up, crossing his massive arms, and handed Brad a clipboard. I imagined Brad reading the text. It wasn't a bank repossession. It was an asset reclamation order signed by Thorne Holdings, LLC, the company that technically owned every vehicle in that driveway, the company that I controlled 100%. Chloe was frantic now. She tried to open the door of the Mercedes, but it was locked. She was banging on the window. And then the driver did something that made me smile into my coffee cup. He walked past the Mercedes and hooked up the Porsche Cayenne next to it. Vanessa's car. Vanessa finally emerged from the house, still in her robe, her phone pressed to her ear. I knew who she was calling. My phone on the table buzzed. Vanessa. I let it ring. It buzzed again. And again. I watched on the camera as she stared at her phone in disbelief. She couldn't comprehend that I wasn't answering. I was the fixer. I was the safety net. I was the one who always picked up. Not today, Vanessa. The tow truck driver engaged the winch. The Mercedes groaned as it was dragged up the ramp. It looked helpless. It looked like just a car. Without my money fueling it, it was just metal and rubber. Chloe collapsed onto the driveway, sobbing. It wasn't the tears of someone who was hurt. It was the tears of a spoiled child who had been told no for the first time in her life. Brad was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, looking at the neighbors' houses, terrified that someone was watching. He lived for appearances, and his appearance was currently being towed away. Reggie looked up from his laptop. Just got confirmation from the insurance provider, he said. The family plan is terminated effective immediately. They are on their own. Also the country club membership. I sent the email notification to Vanessa just now. I looked back at the screen. Vanessa had stopped calling me. She was looking at her phone, reading something. I saw her knees buckle. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. The country club wasn't just a place to play golf. It was her social universe. It was where she held court. It was where she bragged about her charitable work and her wealthy husband. To be expelled from there was a social death sentence. The email would have been polite but firm. Due to the primary member removing authorization, your privileges have been revoked. Please return your locker keys within 24 hours. The tow truck finished loading the cars. The driver handed Brad one last slip of paper, probably the receipt, and climbed into his cab. With a roar of diesel smoke, he pulled away, dragging their dignity down the street. The driveway was empty, just a wide expanse of concrete stained with a few drops of oil. Vanessa, Chloe, and Brad stood there. Three people who thought they were giants, suddenly looking very small against the backdrop of the massive house. They looked at each other. Then they looked at the empty spots where the cars used to be. Then they looked at the phone that I wasn't answering. I finished my coffee and signaled the waitress for the check. "What is next?" Reggie asked. I stood up and put on my jacket. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a job well done. It was the same feeling I used to get when I finished pouring a foundation. It was solid. It was real. Next, I said, looking at the screen one last time as Vanessa threw her phone onto the grass in a fit of rage. Next, we let them realize that the tuition bill is due on Friday. I walked out of the diner and into the morning sun. The air was crisp. I got into my old Ford pickup truck, the one Vanessa hated because she said it made me look like a laborer. I turned the key and the engine purred. I drove away, leaving the silence of my absence to do the screaming for me. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to be superior. Fine. Welcome to the real world. Let's see how much synergy and leverage Brad has when he has to take the bus. The silence at the breakfast table might have been the first shock, but the real earthquake hit Chloe about 2 hours later. While I was already on site breathing in the familiar dust of a demolition project in downtown Atlanta, Chloe was pulling up to the Savannah College of Art and Design. She was pursuing her second master's degree in art history, a degree that cost $42,000 a semester and served mostly as a way for her to avoid getting a real job. She loved the campus. She loved the prestige. She loved walking into the lecture hall with her overpriced latte and her designer bag, looking down on the scholarship students who actually had to work for their place there. I know exactly how the scene played out because the bursar, Mrs. Higgins, is an old friend of mine from church. She told me later that Chloe walked in like she owned the building. She bypassed the line of students waiting for financial aid assistance and marched straight to the front desk. She needed to pick up her enrollment packet for the fall semester, the one that gave her access to the private studios and the exclusive gallery events. Mrs. Higgins told me she didn't even look up from her computer at first. She just let Chloe stand there tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the counter. When she finally acknowledged her, she didn't give her the usual warm greeting. She just slid a piece of paper across the desk. Chloe, being Chloe, didn't read it. She just held out her hand for her student ID card. That is when Mrs. Higgins dropped the hammer. She told Chloe that her enrollment had been flagged for non-payment. I can only imagine the look on Chloe's face. She probably laughed. She probably said something like, "Oh, there must be a mistake. My stepfather handles all the billing. Just charge the account on file." She was so used to the magic of my name clearing the way for her. She thought Marcus Thorne was an infinite resource, a tap that never ran dry. But Mrs. Higgins looked her dead in the eye and delivered the line I had instructed her to give. She said, "The sponsor on file, Mr. Thorne, has formally withdrawn his financial guarantee. He stated that he is no longer responsible for the educational expenses of non-family members." Non-family members. Those 3 words must have hit her harder than the rejection itself. For 15 years, she had treated me like a stranger in my own home, refusing to call me dad, refusing to introduce me to her friends, correcting people when they assumed we were related. She wanted to be separate from me. Fine. Now, she was legally, financially, and publicly separate. Mrs. Higgins said Chloe turned a shade of red she had never seen before. She started screaming. She made a scene in the middle of the administrative office, yelling that I was abusive, that I was holding her hostage financially, that she would sue the school. Security had to be called to escort her out. Imagine that. The princess, who thought she was too good for my last name, was escorted off the premises because she couldn't pay the toll. While she was being humiliated, I was standing on the 10th floor of a high-rise skeleton surrounded by men who knew the value of a hard day's work. The wind was whipping through the steel beams, and the noise of jackhammers was a symphony to my ears. This was my world, a world of concrete, steel, and sweat, a world where you get paid for what you build, not for who you pretend to be. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Brad. I knew this call was coming. I motioned for my foreman, Big Mike, to cut the nearest saw. The noise died down, leaving just the sound of the wind. I didn't put the phone to my ear. I put it on speaker and held it out, letting the ambient noise of the construction site bleed into the call. I wanted him to hear where the money came from. Marcus Brad's voice barked through the speaker, loud enough for Big Mike to hear. He sounded breathless, probably pacing around that empty driveway. "What the hell is going on? Vanessa is hysterical. Chloe just called me screaming that she got kicked out of school." "Are you having some kind of senile episode?" I didn't answer immediately. I let his disrespect hang in the air. Big Mike, a man who had been with me for 30 years, shook his head and spat on the ground. "Answer me, old man!" Brad shouted, his voice cracking. "You are playing a dangerous game. You think you can just cut us off? You think this is funny? You are making my wife cry. Do you hear me? You are embarrassing us." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet cement. "Hello, Brad," I said, my voice calm and steady, a sharp contrast to his high-pitched panic. "I am not playing a game. I am working, something you might want to look into." "Don't give me that blue-collar wisdom crap," Brad snapped. "You need to fix this right now. Call the bank, call the school, apologize to Vanessa. If you don't, I swear to God, Marcus, the consequences will be severe. We are talking about elder abuse. We are talking about emotional distress. I will drag you through court until you don't have a dime left." I chuckled. It was a low, dry sound. Brad, I said, you seem to be confused. You stood at my dinner table last night and told me I was outdated. You said you and Chloe operate at a different level. You said you didn't need my pocket change because you were closing a $2 million seed round. That is different, he yelled. That is business capital. You can't just pull the rug out from under our personal lives. Why not? I asked. You are a self-made man, aren't you, Brad? You are the modern entrepreneur. You are the superior intellect. Surely a man of your status can afford to pay for his wife's tuition and his mother-in-law's grocery bill. Why are you calling the wallet? I thought you didn't like the wallet. Listen to me, you petty old. No, you listen. I cut him off, my voice dropping an octave, turning into the growl that had commanded job sites for 40 years. You called me a stranger. You called me a bank account. Well, the bank is closed. The stranger has left the building. You are the man of the house now, Brad. You are the one with the Ivy League degree and the big ideas. So figure it out. But, Vanessa, he stammered, his bravado slipping. Vanessa is your wife's mother, I said. And Chloe is your wife. They are your family. I am just the help. And the help just quit. I am going to destroy you, Marcus. Brad screamed, his voice trembling with genuine fear now. You will die alone. I looked out over the city of Atlanta. I saw the skyline I helped build. I saw the bridges I poured concrete for. I wasn't alone. I was standing on the foundation of my own life. I have 40 men here waiting for my orders. Brad, I said, men who know how to work. I don't have time to listen to a boy who has never had a callus on his hand tell me about life. You have 48 hours to vacate the property before the sheriff arrives. I suggest you stop crying and start packing. I tapped the red button to end the call. The silence on the other end must have been deafening for him. I looked at Big Mike. He was grinning. Trouble at home, Boss Mike asked. Trash day, Mike, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. Just taking out the trash. Fire that saw back up. We have a schedule to keep. The saw roared back to life, drowning out the memory of Brad's voice. I walked to the edge of the building and looked down. I imagined Brad standing in that big empty kitchen, realizing for the first time that his arrogance was a check his bank account couldn't cash. He had pushed me to the edge thinking I would fall. He forgot that I was the one who built the ledge. But the financial freeze was just the beginning. They thought the money was the only thing I controlled. They forgot about the house itself. They forgot that while they were busy decorating and renovating, I was the one who read the fine print. The real pain wasn't going to be the tuition or the cars. The real pain was going to be the realization that they were guests in a kingdom they thought they had conquered, and the king had just returned to reclaim his throne. The sound of shattering porcelain greeted me before I even turned the key in the lock. It was 6 in the evening. Most men my age come home to the smell of dinner or the sound of the evening news. I came home to the sound of my own assets being liquidated against the wall. I stood on the porch for a moment listening. Smash, scream, smash, scream. It had a rhythm to it like a demolition crew that didn't know what they were doing. I wiped the dust from the construction site off my boots. I wasn't going to track dirt into the house, even if my wife was currently turning the living room into a landfill. I opened the door. The foyer was a disaster zone. The Ming vase, or at least the high-quality replica she thought was a Ming vase, was in 1,000 pieces on the marble floor. But it wasn't just the vase, it was the framed photos of my parents. It was the lamp I had bought in Morocco. Vanessa was standing in the center of the living room, a fireplace poker in her hand, her chest heaving, her hair wild. She looked like a banshee in a Chanel dress. She spun around when she heard the door close. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but mostly swollen from rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. You, she screamed, pointing the iron poker at my chest. You evil, vindictive old man. Do you have any idea what you have done? I didn't flinch. I had stared down union reps who wanted to shut down my sites. I had stared down safety inspectors who wanted to fine me for the color of my hard hats. A 50-year-old socialite with a fireplace tool didn't scare me. I walked past her, stepping carefully over the shards of blue and white porcelain. I hung my jacket in the closet. I took off my hat. I walked into the living room and sat down in my leather recliner, the one chair she hadn't destroyed yet. I am listening, Vanessa, I said calmly. She threw the poker down. It clattered loudly against the floorboards. She marched over to me, getting right in my face. I could smell the alcohol on her breath. A lot of alcohol. You humiliated Chloe, she hissed. You humiliated Brad. You cut off their money. You towed their cars. You made them look like beggars in front of the whole city. And then you humiliated me. My card was declined, Marcus. Declined. At the bakery. Do you know who was behind me in line? Brenda from the charity board. She saw everything. She saw the insufficient funds notice. I will be the laughingstock of the gala next week. I looked at her. I looked at the wrinkles around her eyes that the expensive creams couldn't quite hide. I looked at the fear behind the anger. You won't be going to the gala, Vanessa, I said. I canceled your ticket this afternoon. She froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the dam broke. She let out a scream that sounded more like an animal than a human. She grabbed a crystal paperweight from the side table and hurled it at the wall behind my head. It left a dent in the drywall. I want a divorce, she screamed. I am done. I am done with your controlling, manipulative games. I want out, and I am going to take you for everything you have. She started pacing, her hands flying in the air as she listed her demands. I want this house, she shouted. I want the beach condo. I want half of the construction company. I want alimony. $10,000 a month, no $20,000. I deserve it. I leaned back in the chair. I didn't say a word. I just let her talk. I let her dig the hole deeper. You think you can just treat me like trash, she continued, her voice trembling with self-righteousness. I gave you the best years of my life, Marcus. 5 years. 5 years of living with a man 20 years older than me. 5 years of listening to your boring stories about concrete and steel. 5 years of pretending to care about your old friends and their cheap beer. I nursed you when you had that hip surgery. I organized your schedule. I made you look presentable to society. I gave you class, Marcus. Without me, you are just a rich bricklayer. I reached for the remote control on the side table. I gave you a family. She sobbed, tears finally streaming down her face. Chloe looked up to you, and you threw her to the wolves because of a stupid comment at a dinner party. You are a monster. But don't worry. My lawyer says the courts in Georgia are very generous to wives who have been emotionally abused. We will prove that you were financially controlling. We will prove that you trapped me, and I will walk away with 50% of everything you built. 50%, Marcus. How does that sound? She stopped pacing. She stood in front of me panting, waiting for my reaction. She wanted fear. She wanted me to beg. She wanted me to apologize and open the checkbook just to make the nightmare stop. That is what I had always done before. When she got loud, I paid. That was the dynamic. But the dynamic had changed. I pressed the power button on the remote. The TV screen flickered to life. The evening news was on. The weatherman was talking about a storm front moving in from the west. I kept my eyes on the screen. Are you listening to me? Vanessa shrieked. I said I am taking half. I muted the TV. I turned my head slowly to look at her. I heard you, Vanessa, I said. You want a divorce. That is fine. I think that is a great idea. She blinked, confused by my agreement. But I continued, my voice low and smooth. You might want to call your lawyer back and ask him to read the document we signed 5 years ago. You know, the one you signed without reading because you were too busy planning the honeymoon in Paris. Her eyes narrowed. The prenup, she scoffed. That thing is flimsy. Any good lawyer can tear that apart. We have been married 5 years. I have rights. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Vanessa. My lawyers, the ones who actually went to Harvard, made sure of that. But you should specifically look at Clause 4, Section B. She crossed her arms. What are you talking about? Clause 4, Section B, I repeated. The infidelity clause. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the air conditioning humming in the vents. Vanessa's face went from flush red to a pale, sickly white in the span of a second. She took a half step back. What she whispered. It states quite clearly, I said, turning back to the TV, that in the event of a divorce, if one party is found to have engaged in extramarital affairs, that party forfeits all claims to alimony, spousal support, and division of assets acquired during the marriage. They leave with exactly what they came with. I looked at her again. And you came here with a suitcase of old clothes and a Honda Civic, Vanessa. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. You are crazy, she stammered. I have been a faithful wife. You are delusional. You are just making things up to scare me. You have no proof. I picked up the remote again and unmuted the TV. I wouldn't be so sure about that. I said casually. You see that personal trainer you hired last year? The one named Julian? The one with the ponytail who charges $200 an hour for private sessions at the studio? Vanessa gripped the back of the sofa. Her knuckles were white. He is just a trainer, she said, her voice shaking. Is he? I asked. Because my private investigator seems to think he provides a very different kind of cardio, especially on those Tuesday and Thursday afternoons when you told me you were at charity meetings. I paused, letting the information sink in. I have the photos, Vanessa. I have the hotel receipts from the Ritz-Carlton. I have the text messages where you told him that I was a boring old ATM and that you couldn't wait for me to die so you could be free with the money. She collapsed onto the sofa. The fight had left her body. She looked small. She looked old. The delusion of the victim, the delusion of the long-suffering wife, it all shattered, just like the vase on the floor. She realized in that moment that I hadn't just been working at construction sites all these years. I had been building a case. You have nothing, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Try me, I said. Go ahead. File for divorce. Take me to court. Let's show those photos to the judge. Let's read those texts into the public record. I am sure your friends on the charity board would love to hear them. She put her head in her hands. She started to sob, but this time it wasn't for show. It was the terrified sobbing of a woman who realizes she has gambled everything on a bluff and lost. I stood up. I walked over to the kitchen. I needed a glass of water. Clean this mess up, Vanessa, I called out from the kitchen. If I step on a piece of glass tomorrow morning, I am deducting the medical bill from your final allowance, which, by the way, is $0. I drank my water and listened to her weeping in the living room. She wasn't crying because she lost me. She was crying because she realized the ATM was broken, the police were coming, and she was the one who had robbed the bank. The delusion was over. Reality had arrived, and it was colder than she ever imagined. While I was dealing with the fallout at home, Brad was busy making the biggest mistake of his short, pampered life. He decided to take the fight to what he thought was my weak spot. He thought he could intimidate my business. He drove his rental car, a compact sedan that must have hurt his ego more than the seatbelt hurt his chest, straight to the headquarters of Thorne Construction. I built that headquarters in 1995. It isn't a glass tower in the financial district where people trade imaginary money. It is a low brick building in the industrial park surrounded by warehouses, supply yards, and heavy machinery. It smells like diesel sawdust and honest sweat. It is a place for men who work with their hands, not for boys who work with their thumbs. I was sitting in my office on the second floor looking at the security monitors when Brad burst through the front double doors. He was wearing his best navy blue suit, the one he usually saved for pitch meetings with investors. He looked ridiculous. In a room full of project managers wearing high-vis vests and work boots, Brad looked like a lost child on his way to a prom. He marched up to the front desk where Sarah, my office manager for 20 years, was sorting through invoices. Sarah is a 60-year-old black woman who raised 4 sons and has zero tolerance for nonsense. She didn't even look up when Brad slammed his hand on the counter. "I want to see the board of directors," Brad shouted. His voice cracked a little. He was trying to sound authoritative, but the fear was leaking through. "I want to speak to the partners immediately." Sarah slowly lowered her reading glasses. She looked at Brad's hand on her counter, then up at his flushed face. "Baby," she said, her voice calm and smooth like molasses. "You know good and well there ain't no board of directors here. There is just Mr. Thorne. And I believe he is currently unavailable to people who don't have an appointment or a hard hat." Brad slammed his hand down again. This time a few of the guys in the lobby stopped talking and turned to look. "Don't give me that," Brad spat. "Marcus is clearly mentally compromised. I am his son-in-law. I have power of attorney implications here. I need to speak to whoever is second in command. I need to stop him from liquidating family assets. This is a corporate emergency." I watched on the monitor as Big Mike, my foreman, who had come in from the site to pick up payroll, stepped out of the break room. Mike is 6'5" and built like a vending machine made of muscle. He was wiping donut crumbs off his beard. He didn't like Brad. He never had. He called him the poodle behind his back because Brad was all fluff and nervous energy. Mike walked over to the desk. He didn't rush. He moved with the slow, heavy momentum of a bulldozer. He stood next to Brad, casting a shadow that practically swallowed the boy whole. "Is there a problem here, Miss Sarah?" Mike asked, his voice rumbling like a low, idling truck. "This gentleman is confused," Sarah said, going back to her paperwork. "He thinks this is a public trading floor. He thinks he can demand a meeting." Brad turned to Mike. He tried to stand tall, but he had to crane his neck just to make eye contact. "Back off, big guy," Brad sneered, trying to summon some of that entitlement he used on waiters. "This is a family matter. Marcus is destroying the family finances due to what I can only assume is early onset dementia. I am here to take control of the company operations until we can get a competency hearing." I leaned back in my chair upstairs. Competency hearing. The audacity was almost impressive. He actually thought he could walk into my kingdom, declare me insane, and seize the throne because he had read a few articles on business law. Mike laughed. "It wasn't a nice laugh. It was a bark," son Mike said, crossing his massive arms. "The only thing Marcus is destroying is your free ride. Now you need to turn your little rental car around and get off this property before I mistake you for a trespasser. And we have a very strict protocol for trespassers." Brad's face turned purple. "Do not threaten me. I will sue this entire company. I will sue you personally. I know people. I am closing a deal with venture capitalists who could buy this dump and turn it into a parking lot." That was the wrong thing to say. You don't walk into a man's house and call it a dump. Mike didn't hit him. He didn't have to. He just took one step forward. Brad took 2 steps back, tripping over his own expensive Italian shoes. He stumbled and fell flat on his backside right in the middle of the lobby. The lobby erupted in laughter. The project managers, the secretaries, even the delivery guy who had just walked in with sandwiches, they all laughed. It was the sound of working-class people seeing a pretender get exactly what he deserved. "Get him out of here, Mike," I said into the intercom system. My voice boomed through the lobby speakers, startling Brad. He looked up at the ceiling as if I were God himself speaking from the clouds. "You heard the boss," Mike said. Mike reached down, grabbed Brad by the back of his suit jacket and the seat of his pants, and literally marched him to the door. Brad was kicking and shouting, flailing his limbs like a beetle stuck on its back. Mike threw him out onto the concrete steps. "Stay out," Mike said, and closed the heavy glass doors. I watched Brad scramble to his feet. He brushed the dust off his suit, trying to regain some dignity. He pointed a shaking finger at the building, screaming something about lawsuits and destruction. I picked up my cell phone and dialed his number. I watched through the window blinds as he fished his phone out of his pocket. "Hello," he answered, breathless and frantic. "Marcus, you are dead. You hear me. I am going to bury you in litigation. My investors are going to Brad," I interrupted, keeping my voice low. "Shut up." He stopped talking. "I saw your little performance in the lobby," I said. "You have a lot of energy for a man whose career just evaporated." "What are you talking about?" Brad snapped. "My career is fine. My startup is about to launch. We have the funding secured." "Do you?" I asked. "Of course I do." "We signed the term sheet last week. The money wires on Friday." I took a sip of my water. "Brad, do you remember why those investors from Silicon Valley even took a meeting with you? Do you remember whose name was at the top of your advisory board slide in your pitch deck?" There was a silence on the line. A long, heavy silence. "It was my name, Brad," I said. "Marcus Thorne, founder of Thorne Construction. A man with 40 years of unblemished credit and business history in this city. They didn't bet on your app. They bet on my oversight. They bet on the fact that I was backing you." "So what?" Brad said, his voice trembling. "You are still on the board. You can't just—" "I sent an email at 9 o'clock this morning, Brad," I said. "I formally resigned from your advisory board. I also sent a personal note to your lead investor, Mr. Henderson. I told him that I am withdrawing all personal guarantees and that I no longer endorse the leadership of the company due to ethical concerns." I watched through the blinds. Brad stopped moving. He stood frozen on the sidewalk. "You?" "You didn't," he whispered. "Check your email, Brad." I watched him pull the phone away from his ear. I watched his thumb scroll. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the exact moment his heart broke. Because right then, a second call came through to his phone. He looked at the screen. He panicked. He answered it. "Mr. Henderson." "Hi. Yes, Wait, please let me explain. It is just a family misunderstanding. Marcus is—" "What? No, you can't pull the term sheet. We have contracts. Hello?" He lowered the phone. He looked at the building. He looked up at my window. He couldn't see me behind the blinds, but he knew I was there. His $2 million was gone. His startup was dead. His reputation was trash. I spoke into the phone again, which he was still holding loosely in his hand. "It is amazing, isn't it, Brad?" I said. "You thought you were a shark. You walked around my house eating my food, driving my cars, treating me like I was some dumb old laborer. You thought you were the genius, but you were just a remora attached to a whale, and the whale just dove deep. Marcus, please, he whimpered. This destroys everything. We have debt, we have lease agreements. Without that funding, I am personally liable. I will go bankrupt. I know, I said. Welcome to the free market, son. You wanted to be a big-shot businessman. Well, lesson number 1, don't bite the hand that feeds you. And lesson number 2, always read the fine print. I hung up. I watched him stand there for another minute. He looked like he was going to vomit. He looked at his shiny shoes scuffed from the concrete. He looked at his suit wrinkled from being manhandled. He realized then that he wasn't better than Big Mike. He wasn't better than Sarah. He wasn't better than me. In fact, without me, he was absolutely nothing. He got into his rental car. It took him 3 tries to start the engine because his hands were shaking so bad. He drove away slowly defeated. I turned away from the window. Sarah buzzed my intercom. Mr. Thorne, she said. Lawyer Reggie is on line 2. He says he has the draft for the eviction notice ready for the sheriff. Put him through Sarah, I said. And Sarah, yes, sir, order pizza for the crew today, on me. And tell Mike he gets the bonus this week for handling pest control. I sat back in my chair. The office was quiet again. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of work being done. Real work. Brad and Vanessa were learning the hard way. They lived in a house of cards built on a foundation of my generosity. And I had just pulled the bottom card out. The collapse was noisy, it was messy, and God help me, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. But I wasn't done. The money was gone. The careers were ruined. Now it was time to take the roof over their heads. They had 48 hours, and the clock was ticking louder than a time bomb. I knew Vanessa had a secret stash. Every smart woman does, and Vanessa was smart in the devious kind of way. For 3 years, she had been skimming off the grocery budget, padding the expenses for charity events, and tucking away cash gifts I gave her for holidays. She thought I didn't see the withdrawals. She thought I didn't notice when a $5,000 catering bill for a luncheon actually only cost $2,000. I let her keep it. I called it her severance package even before I knew I was going to fire her. She took that cash, about $40,000, wrapped in rubber bands inside a shoebox, and walked into the office of Arthur Sterling. Sterling was the kind of divorce lawyer who had billboards on the highway with his face photoshopped to look 10 years younger. He was known as the Pit Bull of Atlanta. He promised women he would leave their husbands sleeping on a park bench. He cost $700 an hour, and Vanessa slammed that shoebox on his desk like she was buying a hitman. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but Reggie was, and Reggie has a photographic memory. He recounted every second of that meeting to me later, and I can see it as clearly as if I were watching it on a movie screen. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor overlooking the city I helped build. Vanessa was wearing her best victim outfit, a modest black dress, no jewelry, trying to look like the abused wife of a tyrant. Sterling sat next to her, puffing out his chest in a suit that cost more than my first car. Across the table sat Reggie. Just Reggie. No paralegals, no stacks of intimidation tactics, just my old friend with a single manila folder and a bottle of water. Sterling started the meeting by sliding a thick document across the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. "We are not here to negotiate pennies," Sterling said, his voice booming for an audience that wasn't there. "My client, Mrs. Thorne, has been subjected to financial abuse, emotional distress, and public humiliation. We are filing for immediate divorce on the grounds of cruelty. And we are demanding full ownership of the marital residence at 4500 Peachtree Road." Vanessa nodded, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "That is right," she said, her voice trembling with performed frailty. "That house is my home. I decorated it. I put my soul into it. I cannot be expected to move. Marcus can go to his lake cabin. I want the house." Reggie didn't open the document Sterling had slid over. He didn't even look at it. He just took a sip of his water and looked at Vanessa. "Is that all?" Reggie asked calmly. "No, that is not all," Sterling shouted. "We want 50% of Thorne Construction. We want the beach condo in Florida. We want the mountain retreat in Aspen. And we want spousal support of $25,000 a month for the next 20 years to maintain the lifestyle to which Mrs. Thorne has become accustomed." Vanessa looked at Sterling with admiration. She thought she had hired a wizard. She thought she was about to cash out the biggest lottery ticket of her life. Reggie sighed. He opened his single manila folder. He pulled out one sheet of paper. It wasn't a thick legal brief. It was a copy of a deed transfer dated 1998. Mr. Sterling Reggie began, his voice low and professional. You are a very expensive lawyer. I assume you did a title search on the property before making these demands. Sterling scoffed. Of course. The house is in the name of Marcus Thorne. We have the tax records. Reggie slid the paper across the table. Look closer, Arthur. Sterling picked up the paper. I imagine the silence in that room was heavy enough to crush a man. Vanessa leaned over, trying to read the fine print. The deed doesn't say Marcus Thorne, Reggie said. It says the Eliza Thorne Memorial Trust. Vanessa looked up confused. Eliza, who is Eliza? Reggie looked her dead in the eye. Eliza was Marcus's first wife, the woman who actually helped him build that house, the woman who mixed the cement for the driveway with her own hands. She died of cancer 20 years ago. And before she died, she and Marcus made a decision. Sterling was reading the document frantically, now flipping the page over looking for a loophole. This is an irrevocable trust, Sterling stammered. Correct, Reggie said. The house does not belong to Marcus. It never has. Not since 1998. The entire estate, including the $4 million mansion you are sitting in right now, belongs to a charitable trust dedicated to housing and educating orphan children in the Atlanta metro area. Vanessa's face went pale. That's a lie, she screamed, dropping her act. We have lived there for 5 years. I hosted the garden club there. It's my house. It is a facility, Mrs. Thorne. Reggie corrected her gently. Marcus is merely the appointed caretaker of the trust's physical assets. The trust allows him to reside on the property as long as he maintains it. He pays rent to the trust every month. He doesn't own the bricks. He doesn't own the land. He doesn't even own the chandeliers you like so much. Sterling slammed the paper down. This is fraud. You can't hide assets in a charity. It's not hidden, Reggie said, leaning forward. It is public record. It has been filed with the state for 2 decades, long before Marcus even met Vanessa. You can't claim marital assets on property that wasn't Marcus's to begin with. Vanessa stood up, her hands shaking. So what does that mean? Reggie looked at her with a mix of pity and cold resolve. It means, Vanessa, that by filing for divorce and demanding the removal of the caretaker Marcus, you are essentially triggering the eviction clause of the trust. If the caretaker is removed or harassed, the trust board has the right to secure the property for its intended purpose. Intended purpose, Vanessa whispered. Yes, Reggie said. An orphanage. The board has already been notified of the domestic disturbance. They have voted to convert the property effective immediately. He pulled another paper from his folder. This is a notice to vacate, Reggie said. Since you are not a trustee and you are no longer the guest of the caretaker, you are trespassing on charitable property. You have 48 hours to remove your personal effects. Anything left after Friday at 5 p.m. will be considered a donation to the orphans. Vanessa fell back into her chair. The air had left the room. She looked at Sterling, but the pit bull had lost his bark. He knew he was beaten. An irrevocable trust established 20 years ago is a fortress that no divorce court can breach. But the company, Sterling tried, his voice weak. We still want half the company. Reggie smiled. He had been waiting for this one. Clause 4, Section B, Reggie said. The infidelity clause. We have the photos, Arthur. We have the texts with the personal trainer.
Do you really want to do this in open court?
Do you want me to project those images on a 10-foot screen in front of a judge? Because I will. And then Mrs. Thorne won't just leave with nothing. She will leave with a bill for my legal fees. Sterling closed his briefcase. He looked at Vanessa. I think we need to reassess our strategy, he muttered. Reassess? Vanessa shrieked. Reassess? I just paid you $40,000. You told me I would get the house. You told me I would be rich. Reggie stood up. He buttoned his jacket. You should have read the plaque by the front gate, Vanessa, Reggie said. The one you always made the gardeners cover up with ivy because you thought it looked tacky. It says, the Eliza House, a sanctuary for the future. You were never the owner. You were just a guest who overstayed her welcome. He walked to the door, leaving them in the ruins of their greed. I wasn't there, but I know what happened next. Vanessa fired Sterling on the spot, screaming that he was incompetent. She demanded her money back. He told her he had already billed 20 hours for the consult and file review. She left that office with no house, no husband, no settlement, and her secret stash of cash reduced to 0. When Reggie called me 5 minutes later, I was sitting in my truck eating a sandwich. "How did it go?" I asked. Reggie chuckled. "You know Marcus." I almost felt bad for her. She really thought she was the queen of the castle. And now she knows she was just the janitor, Reggie said. And the shift is over. I hung up the phone. I thought about Eliza. I thought about how we built that house with the dream of filling it with children who had nothing. For years, Vanessa had filled it with shallow people and empty parties. It was time to give the house back to its purpose. It was time to scrub the toxicity out of the walls. Vanessa had 48 hours. But in my mind, she was already gone. The legal shark hadn't just bitten her. He had swallowed her whole, and he didn't even have to show his teeth. "You call it a lie." That is what Chloe screamed at me as she stood in the center of the living room, her face twisted into a mask of ugly entitlement. She threw her expensive purse onto the sofa, the same sofa she had forbidden me from sitting on in my work clothes just a week ago. "You are a liar, Marcus," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You scammed us. You let us live here for 5 years thinking this was our inheritance. You let my mother decorate. You let me bring my friends here. And the whole time you knew we didn't own a single brick. You are a sick, manipulative old man." Vanessa was sitting on the ottoman weeping into her hands. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of a woman who had just realized her retirement plan was actually a charitable donation. I stood by the fireplace. I ran my hand along the rough stone of the mantel. They didn't know the story of this stone. They didn't know that I drove the truck to the quarry in North Georgia myself to pick it out. They didn't know that my hands bled laying this hearth. I looked at Chloe. She was 24, healthy, educated, and completely useless. She had never built anything in her life. She only knew how to consume. "I didn't lie, Chloe," I said, my voice barely rising above a whisper. I omitted. "There is a difference." "You led us on," she screamed, stomping her foot like a toddler. "You let us believe we were rich. I let you live in a $4 million mansion for free," I corrected her. "I paid the electricity that kept you cool in the summer. I paid the gas that kept you warm in the winter. I paid the pool guys to clean the leaves out of the water so you could swim. I paid the landscapers to cut the grass you walked on. For 5 years I asked for nothing. 0 rent, 0 contribution. And now, because the free ride is over, you call it a scam." I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. "Let me tell you a story," I said, turning back to them. "And for once, you are going to listen." I didn't wait for their permission. I just started talking. It was 1998. You were probably just learning to walk, Chloe. I wasn't a rich developer then. I was a contractor with a bad back and a dream, and I had a wife. Her name was Eliza. Vanessa looked up. Her eyes were swollen. She hated hearing Eliza's name. She always felt threatened by the memory of the woman who came before her. "Eliza was a teacher," I continued. "She taught at the poorest school in the district. She saw things that would break your heart. Kids coming to school in the winter without coats. Kids sleeping in cars. Kids who had never seen a bedroom with a door." I walked to the center of the room, standing on the Persian rug Vanessa had bought with my money. "We couldn't have children of our own," I said. "We tried for 10 years. It broke her heart. So we decided to build something else. We bought this land when it was just an overgrown lot full of weeds and trash. We didn't hire a big crew. It was mostly just me, Eliza, and a few guys from the neighborhood who worked for beer and sandwiches." I pointed to the walls. Eliza sanded these floorboards on her hands and knees. She painted these walls. She planted that oak tree in the front yard with her own hands. We didn't build this house to show off to the country club. We built it because Eliza had a vision. She wanted a place big enough to hold the pain of the children she couldn't save. She wanted a sanctuary. I looked at Vanessa. When she got sick when the cancer came back the second time, she made me promise. She said, "Marcus, don't let this house become a tomb. Don't let it just be a pile of expensive bricks. Make it matter." So we created the trust. We signed the papers in her hospital room 3 days before she died. This house belongs to the children of Atlanta who have nowhere else to go. It doesn't belong to me. And it certainly doesn't belong to a woman who cheats on her husband with a personal trainer. Vanessa flinched as if I had slapped her. "You are cruel," she whispered. "Cruel," I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Cruel is bringing a man into my bed while I am out working to pay for your lifestyle. Cruel is letting your daughter treat me like a servant in the house my dead wife built. Cruel is looking at a man who has given you the world and telling him he is not enough because he doesn't have the right pedigree. I looked at Chloe. She was quiet now, but her eyes were still defiant. So what? She spat. You are going to kick us out. You are going to throw a pregnant woman on the street. I raised an eyebrow. Pregnant. That was a new card she was playing. I am not throwing anyone on the street, I said. You have options. You have a husband who claims to be a millionaire entrepreneur. Surely Brad can rent a suite at the Four Seasons for you. Or maybe you can go stay with your biological father, the one you always talk about with such reverence. Chloe looked away. We both knew her biological father hadn't sent a birthday card in 10 years, let alone offered a place to stay. The trust board met this morning, I said, checking my watch. They have voted to expedite the conversion of the property. The contractors are coming on Monday to retrofit the bedrooms for bunk beds. They need the space. Monday. Vanessa gasped. That is 3 days away. Actually, I said the lawyers advised a buffer period. You have 48 hours. By Friday at 5 p.m. the locks will be changed, the security codes will be reset, and the sheriff's deputies will be here to ensure the asset is secured for the charity. I walked toward the stairs. I was tired. My bones ached. But it was a good ache, the ache of cleaning up a mess. But where will we go? Vanessa wailed. We have nowhere to go. Marcus, you can't do this to us. I stopped on the bottom step and looked back at them. They looked so small in that big room. You have 48 hours to figure that out, I said. I suggest you start packing instead of crying. And Vanessa. She looked at me, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Don't take the towels, I said. They belong to the trust. I walked up the stairs, leaving them in the silence of the museum they had mistaken for a home. I could hear them starting to argue below me. Chloe was blaming Vanessa for getting caught. Vanessa was blaming Chloe for antagonizing me. They were eating each other alive. I went into my bedroom, or rather the caretaker's suite. I opened the closet and pulled out my old duffel bag. I didn't have much to pack. Just my work clothes, a few books, and the picture of Eliza that I kept in the drawer. I looked at her photo. She was smiling, covered in paint, standing in the frame of this house 20 years ago. We did it, Ellie, I whispered to the photo. I almost lost our way. I almost let them turn this place into a monument to greed. But I fixed it. It is coming back to you. I zipped up the bag. I wasn't going to stay for the 48 hours. I didn't want to watch them scramble. I didn't want to hear their begging or their threats. I was going to the lake cabin. It was small, it was quiet, and it was mine. I walked back downstairs. They were frantic now. Vanessa was on the phone, probably calling friends who wouldn't answer. Chloe was dragging boxes out of the closet, throwing designer clothes into them with reckless abandon. I walked to the front door. I opened it and breathed in the night air. Goodbye, Vanessa, I said without turning around. She didn't answer. She was too busy screaming at the moving company, trying to book a truck with a credit card that no longer worked. I walked to my truck. I didn't look back at the house. I knew what it looked like. I knew every brick, and I knew that soon it would be filled with laughter and hope instead of bitterness and vanity. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw a car pull up. It was Brad. He looked disheveled. He looked broken. He saw me and stopped his car. We locked eyes for a second. He expected me to be angry. He expected a confrontation, but I just gave him a little two-finger salute, shifted into gear, and drove away. The rearview mirror showed them all converging on the front lawn, Brad, Chloe, Vanessa. A family united only by their sudden, catastrophic failure. I turned the corner and they disappeared from view. The bloodline truth was simple. Family isn't about whose DNA you share. It is about who stands next to you when the cement is wet and the work is hard. They were never my family. They were just occupants. And the lease had finally expired. The descent from the penthouse to the pavement is a long drop, and usually you hit every branch on the way down. For Brad and Chloe, gravity kicked in exactly 1 hour after they left my driveway. They drove straight to the Sovereign, the most exclusive high-rise in Buckhead. They walked into the leasing office with their chins held high, smelling like desperation and expensive cologne. They picked out a 3-bedroom unit with a skyline view costing $6,000 a month. They were laughing, probably making jokes about how they would upgrade the fixtures. Then came the credit check. I wasn't there, but I know how the system works. I built that system. Brad sat there crossing his legs, waiting for the leasing agent to come back with the keys. Instead, she came back with a single sheet of paper and a tight, pitying smile. She told them there was a problem. She told them that without the guarantor me, the application had to run solely on their personal credit histories. And that is where the fantasy died. Brad's credit score was a 580. He had maxed out cards, missed payments on his previous lease, and had a debt-to-income ratio that would make a loan shark nervous. Chloe. She had no credit history at all. She was a ghost. For her entire adult life, every bill, every car note, every credit card had been linked to my social security number. On paper, she didn't exist. The agent told them they would need a co-signer earning at least 3 times the monthly rent. Brad tried to argue. He raised his voice. He dropped names. He told them he was a venture-backed CEO. The agent just pointed to the door. Security was on standby. They were escorted out not as royalty, but as liabilities. They went to the next building. Rejected. Then the next. Rejected. By 4 in the afternoon, the reality of their situation had set in. They weren't looking for luxury anymore. They were looking for a roof. Any roof. They ended up in a complex on the outskirts of Decatur near the old industrial district. It was a place where the fences had razor wire and the parking lot was full of cars missing bumpers. They signed a lease for a 2-bedroom unit on the ground floor. No granite countertops, no concierge, just beige carpet stained with years of other people's bad luck and walls so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing about child support. I can only imagine the silence in the car as they unloaded their designer luggage onto the cracked pavement. Chloe in her Gucci heels stepping over a puddle of questionable liquid. Brad in his Italian suit sweating in the humidity, realizing there was no valet to take the bags. The first night was a wake-up call. But the second day was the lesson. Chloe had never done a chore in her life. In my house, the laundry went into a hamper and reappeared clean and folded on her bed. In the new apartment, there was no maid. There wasn't even a washer and dryer in the unit. She had to walk to the communal laundry room in the basement. It was a damp concrete room that smelled of mildew and bleach. Chloe dragged a bag of clothes down there. She didn't know you had to separate the colors. She didn't know you couldn't wash silk on the heavy-duty cycle. She dumped everything in Brad's white dress shirts, her red silk blouse, his expensive slacks, and poured in cheap detergent she had bought at the corner store. When she pulled the wet lump of fabric out 40 minutes later, everything was pink. The silk blouse was shredded. Brad's shirts were ruined. She stood there in the flickering fluorescent light and started to cry. Not a pretty cinematic cry, an ugly, heaving sob of frustration. She dropped the wet clothes on the dirty floor and just stared at them. She was 24 years old, holding a master's degree, and she had been defeated by a washing machine. She carried the wet, ruined bundle back to the apartment. She opened the door expecting sympathy. She expected Brad to hug her, to tell her it was okay, that they would figure it out. But the Brad who greeted her wasn't the charming husband from the country club. The Brad in this apartment was a trapped animal. He was sitting on a second-hand sofa they had found drinking cheap beer, staring at his phone, watching his social media followers drop as the news of his failure spread. He looked up as Chloe walked in. He saw the pink shirts. He saw the ruined clothes. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I didn't know," Chloe sobbed, dropping the basket. "I didn't know the red would run." "I am sorry, Brad. I will buy you new ones." "With what money?" Brad snapped, standing up. He kicked the basket across the room, the wet clothes scattered across the beige carpet. "With what money, Chloe?" "My cards are maxed out. Your cards are frozen. We have $300 in cash to last us the month." He walked over to her. He didn't look at her with love. He looked at her with disgust. "You are useless," he spat. "Do you know that? You are completely useless. You can't cook. You can't clean. You can't even wash a damn shirt without destroying it." "It was an accident," Chloe screamed back. "Why are you being so mean? You are supposed to take care of me. You said you were a millionaire." Brad laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound that bounced off the thin walls. "I was going to be a millionaire," he yelled, getting right in her face. "I had the deal. I had the funding. I had the plan. And do you know why I lost it? Because of you." "Me!" Chloe gasped. "Yes, you!" Brad shouted, poking her in the chest. "Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut at dinner. You had to insult the old man. You had to act like a spoiled brat. If you had just smiled and taken the envelope, we would still be in the mansion. I would still have my funding. But no, you had to have an ego." He turned away from her, running his hands through his hair. I married you for the connection, Chloe, he said, his back to her. I married you because Marcus Thorne was the golden ticket. I thought being his son-in-law would open every door in Atlanta. Chloe froze. The tears stopped. The air left her lungs. What did you say? She whispered. Brad turned around. His face was twisted with malice. He was done pretending. You heard me, he said. Look at you. You have no skills. You have no drive. You are just a pretty face with a rich stepfather. Except now you don't even have the stepfather. So what are you, Chloe? What do you bring to the table besides debt and pink shirts? Chloe looked at him. This was the man she had defended against me. This was the man she said was superior to me. This was the love of her life. And in the harsh light of a slum apartment stripped of the luxury that had disguised him, she saw him for what he really was. A leech, a coward, a bully. I hate you, she whispered. Good, Brad said, grabbing his keys, because I can't stand the sight of you right now. I am going out. Don't wait up. He slammed the door so hard the cheap frame rattled. Chloe stood alone in the center of the living room. The smell of stale cigarette smoke from the neighbor's apartment seeped under the door. She looked at the pile of ruined clothes. She looked at the empty refrigerator. She looked at her phone, but she had no one to call. Her mother was in the same boat, probably having a meltdown in a motel room somewhere. She slid down the wall and sat on the floor. For the first time in her life, she felt the crushing weight of consequence. There was no Marcus to fix it. There was no check coming in the mail. There was just the hum of the refrigerator and the realization that she had traded a king for a joker, and the joker had just played his last card. Outside, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. But for Chloe and Brad, the storm was already inside. They were learning the hardest lesson of all: poverty doesn't just empty your pockets. It reveals your character. And they were finding out that their character was as bankrupt as their bank accounts. They wanted a reality check. The bill had just arrived. Desperation has a distinct smell. It smells like cheap motel soap, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of fear. Vanessa sat on the edge of the bed in the cramped beige room at the Motel 6. They had lasted exactly one night in the slum apartment before she demanded Brad use the last of his cash to get them a room with air conditioning. But the cool air couldn't chill the panic rising in her chest. She had nothing. No house, no car, no black card, and worst of all, no audience. For a woman like Vanessa, invisibility was a fate worse than death. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. Her hair was messy, her eyes were puffy, and she wasn't wearing makeup. Perfect. She didn't fix it. In fact, she smeared her mascara just a little bit more under her left eye. She pulled at the collar of her blouse to make it look disheveled. She needed to look like a survivor. She needed to look like a victim. She sat back on the bed, propped her phone up against the ice bucket, and opened the social media app. Her finger hovered over the button that said, Go Live. She had 5,000 followers, mostly other socialites and charity board members, but she knew how the algorithm worked. Tragedy sells, tears go viral. She hit the button. 3, 2, 1. Live. She didn't speak immediately. She just let the camera focus on her trembling chin. She looked down, then up, blinking back tears that she summoned on command. Hi, everyone, she whispered, her voice cracking perfectly. I didn't want to do this. I really didn't. But I have nowhere else to turn. The viewer count started to tick up. 10, 50, 100. The notifications started popping up. Vanessa, are you okay? Where are you? You look terrible. I know I usually post about galas and garden parties, she continued, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. But that life, it was all a lie. I have been living in a nightmare. She took a deep, shuddering breath. My husband, Marcus Thorne, he isn't who you think he is. You see the successful businessman, you see the philanthropist. But behind closed doors, she let the sentence hang there. She didn't say he hit her. She knew that was actionable libel if she was too specific, but she implied it. She let the silence do the heavy lifting. He threw us out, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Me and my daughter. He cut off our money. He took our cars. He left us on the street with nothing. And why? Because I asked for a little respect, because I dared to speak up. He is a powerful man. He has connections with the police, with the judges. I am terrified, you guys. I am terrified he is going to come for me. The comments section exploded. It was a waterfall of outrage. Oh my God, I knew there was something off about him. Stay safe, Vanessa. This is financial abuse. We are with you. Someone call the police. Vanessa watched the hearts and angry emojis float up the screen. It was like a drug. The adrenaline rushed through her veins. She wasn't the loser in the motel room anymore. She was the heroine of a tragedy. She was the center of attention. He told me I was nothing without him, she said, leaning into the camera. He said he owned me. He said because he paid the bills, he owned my body and my soul. And when I tried to leave, well, you see where I am, hiding in a motel. Please, I just need someone to know the truth.
If something happens to me, if I disappear, please don't let him get away with it. She ended the stream. She sat back, her heart racing. The video was processing. Within 10 minutes, it had 5,000 views. In an hour, it had 50,000. It was being shared on community pages, on local news groups, on forums dedicated to exposing toxic men. The internet mob had awakened, and they were hungry for blood. By the next morning, the digital firestorm had crossed into the real world. I was at my lake cabin, a small wooden house about an hour north of the city. It was my sanctuary. I had built the dock myself. I knew every bass in the lake by name. I was standing on the porch, a cup of coffee in one hand and a garden hose in the other, watering the hydrangeas I had planted for Eliza 20 years ago. The silence of the morning was broken not by birds, but by the sound of tires on gravel. Lots of tires. I looked down the long driveway. A news van with a satellite dish on top was bumping along the dirt road. Behind it was another car. And another. The vultures had arrived. They parked at the edge of my property line. Doors flew open. Cameramen jumped out, hoisting heavy equipment on their shoulders. Reporters with perfectly sprayed hair adjusted their microphones. They were shouting before they even got close. Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, is it true you left your wife destitute? Did you physically threaten Vanessa Thorne? What do you have to say about the allegations of financial coercion? Why are you hiding out here, sir? They were swarming the gate like ants on a dropped lollipop. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the angry black man. They wanted me to come down there and yell, to wave my arms, to spray them with the hose. That would be the clip that played on the 6 o'clock news. That would be the clip that convicted me in the court of public opinion. I didn't move. I didn't frown. I didn't smile. I turned the nozzle on the hose to a gentle mist. I focused on the blue petals of the hydrangeas. They looked thirsty. It had been a dry week. My phone was vibrating in my pocket against my hip. It was buzzing nonstop. Probably my PR team. Probably clients canceling contracts. Probably old friends wondering if I was a secret monster. I let it buzz. Down at the gate, a young reporter in a sharp blue suit was trying to climb the fence. "Sir, we have a video of your wife crying in a motel room. She says she fears for her life. Do you have a comment?" I moved to the next bush. A rhododendron. It needed a little more water at the roots. The cameramen were zooming in. I could hear the shutters of their cameras clicking furiously, capturing every wrinkle on my face, looking for a sign of guilt. They were writing the narrative in their heads. The reclusive tycoon. The cold-hearted abuser. Inside the cabin, the landline rang. I ignored that, too. I knew exactly what Vanessa was doing. It was the desperate play of a gambler who has run out of chips. She was betting on the fact that shame would break me. She thought that if she made enough noise, I would write a check just to make it stop. She thought I cared about what strangers thought of me. She forgot that I built my reputation on concrete, not on likes and shares. Concrete takes time to cure, but once it is set, you can't break it with words. I finished watering the garden. I took my time coiling the hose back onto its rack, making sure there were no kinks. I wiped my hands on a rag. Then I turned and looked at the mob at my gate. There were probably 20 of them now. They went silent as I turned, expecting a statement. They held their microphones out like spears. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. I didn't answer the calls. I opened the camera app. I took a picture of them. A calm, steady photo of the circus. Then I turned my back on them, walked into my cabin, and closed the door. I locked it. I pulled the curtains. I went to the kitchen and made myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss on rye. I sat down at the table and finally looked at my phone. I opened the email from Reggie. The subject line was evidence collection. Inside was a folder. It contained everything. The screenshots of Vanessa's texts to her lover where she mocked me.
the bank statements showing her withdrawals, the receipts from the hotels, and most importantly, the security footage from the house showing her attacking Brad, breaking the furniture and throwing things at me. She had gone on the internet and claimed I was violent. She had claimed I was a monster. And in doing so, she had opened the door wide for me to walk through. Reggie's text message popped up at the top of the screen. The defamation suit is drafted. The evidence is compiled. When do you want to release the Kraken? I took a bite of my sandwich. I watched the dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight coming through the window. Outside, I could still hear the faint shouting of the reporters. Not yet, I typed back. Let her talk. Let her go on the morning shows. Let her do an interview. Let her dig the hole so deep she can never climb out. We wait for the press conference. I set the phone down. Vanessa wanted a show, I would give her a show. But the finale wasn't going to be my destruction. It was going to be the most public, humiliating, and absolute dismantling of a lie that Atlanta had ever seen. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. In construction, you don't pour the foundation until the ground is leveled. Vanessa was leveling the ground for me, stripping away every bit of sympathy she might have had by proving just how vicious she could be. I finished my lunch. I felt calm. The plants were watered. The evidence was ready. The storm was raging outside, but in here, everything was exactly according to plan. The rain had stopped, leaving the morning air over Atlanta crisp and clear. It was 10 o'clock on a Wednesday, exactly 48 hours after the dinner that ended my marriage. The driveway of the estate, which just 2 days ago had been filled with luxury cars and arrogance, was now filled with news vans. I had invited them. Vanessa wanted to play the media game. She wanted to use the court of public opinion to hang me. She didn't realize that in a court of law you need evidence, but in the court of public opinion you just need the truth. And I had brought receipts. I stood behind the heavy oak doors of the main entrance. I could hear the hum of the crowd outside. There were reporters from every local station, a few national affiliates, and a horde of independent bloggers who had spent the last 24 hours calling me a monster. They were expecting a fight. They were expecting a defensive old man trying to explain away his cruelty. They were hungry for a soundbite they could twist. Reggie stood next to me. He adjusted his tie. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man about to watch a controlled demolition of a condemned building. "Are you ready, Marcus?" he asked. "Once we play this, there is no going back. Their reputation will be scorched earth." I looked at the monitor showing the front lawn. I saw the podium we had set up. I saw the massive LED screen we had rented and positioned behind it. "They scorched the earth first, Reggie," I said. "I am just planting the truth in the ashes." I pushed the doors open. The sound of camera shutters was like a machine gun volley. Flashes blinded me for a second, but I didn't blink. I walked slowly to the podium. I was wearing my best suit, a charcoal gray three-piece that I hadn't worn since the day I rang the opening bell for my company on the stock exchange. I stood tall. I didn't look frail. I didn't look abusive. I looked like the man who built half this city. I stood at the microphone and waited. I let the silence stretch out. I let them shout their questions. "Mr. Thorne, is it true you starve your wife? Mr. Thorne, why did you kick your pregnant stepdaughter onto the street? Mr. Thorne, do you have no heart?" I raised one hand. The crowd slowly quieted down. They wanted to hear the monster speak. "I am not here to give a speech." I said, my voice deep and steady, amplified by the speakers to reach the back of the lawn. "I am not here to defend my character. My character is written in the steel and concrete of the hospitals and schools I have built for 40 years. I am here to address the allegations made by my estranged wife, Vanessa Thorne, regarding the events of her daughter's birthday dinner." I paused. I looked directly into the camera lens of the biggest news station. I knew Vanessa was watching. I knew she was sitting in that motel room, huddled around a phone with Chloe and Brad, waiting for me to crumble. "Vanessa claimed I abandoned them without cause," I continued. "She claimed I was a tyrant who demanded total control. She claimed I silenced them. Today, I am going to let them speak." I stepped back from the podium and pointed to the massive screen behind me. Reggie hit the button. The screen flickered to life. The timestamp showed Tuesday, 7:15 p.m. The audio was crystal clear. It was the security footage from the dining room. A gasp went through the crowd of reporters as the image stabilized. They saw the opulent table. They saw the wine. They saw me sitting quietly. And they saw Chloe. The audio boomed across the lawn. "Is this a joke?" Chloe's voice rang out shrill and mocking. 25,000, Marcus. Seriously. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I watched the reporters. They looked at each other. They were expecting a video of me yelling. Instead, they were watching a young woman sneer at a gift that was more than most people earn in a year. The video continued. Brad's voice filled the air. "You possess a very old-school blue-collar mindset. We don't need your little rainy day fund." I saw a reporter in the front row, a woman who had written a scathing article about me that morning, lower her notepad. Her jaw was tight. She looked offended. Then came the kicker. Vanessa's voice. "You are just the provider. So don't correct her. Stay in your lane." The video ended with me quietly standing up and walking away. No yelling, no violence. Just a man accepting his dismissal. The screen went black. The silence on the lawn was heavy. It was the silence of shame. The mob realized they had been protecting the wolves, not the sheep. I stepped back to the microphone. "Stay in your lane," I repeated. "That is what my wife told me. She told me my role was to pay the bills and keep my mouth shut. She told the world I was abusive because I finally decided to close the checkbook." I looked around. "But there is one more thing," I said. Vanessa claimed in her live stream that she and her family were victims of my financial control. She claimed they were destitute. She claimed her son-in-law Brad was a brilliant businessman that I was jealous of. I nodded to Reggie. A new image appeared on the screen. It wasn't a video this time. It was a spreadsheet, a bank statement. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the statement for a supplementary American Express black card I issued to Brad 6 months ago for business expenses related to his startup. He told me he needed it for server costs and marketing." The numbers on the screen were highlighted in red. $198,000, I read aloud. "Spent in 6 months. I let that number sink in. "But look at the vendors," I said. The camera zoomed in on the screen. The reporters squinted. Sugarbaby.com, premium subscription. The Sapphire Club, VIP room. Venmo transfer, Tiffany rent. Venmo transfer, Crystal car note. Cartier. Bracelet. Not purchased for Chloe. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was audible gasps. I turned back to the microphone. "My wife stood by this man," I said, my voice hardening. "She told me I was jealous of his intellect. She watched him insult me at my own table. She called me a monster for cutting him off. But while she was playing the victim, her son-in-law was using my money. Money I earned sweating in the sun to finance a lifestyle that had nothing to do with business and certainly nothing to do with his pregnant wife. I imagined the scene in the motel room right now. I imagined Chloe staring at the screen. I imagined the color draining from Brad's face. I imagined Vanessa realizing that the son-in-law she had championed, the man she had chosen over me, had played her for a fool. I didn't have to say anything else. The evidence spoke for itself. The abusive husband was actually the bankroll for a cheating, lying parasite. The victim wife was an enabler who bit the hand that fed her, and the innocent daughter was married to a man who was spending her inheritance on other women. I looked at the cameras one last time. "I am evicted from their lives just as they asked," I said. "And now I am evicting them from my narrative. The house behind me will be turned over to the Eliza Thorne Trust on Friday. It will be an orphanage. It will house children who actually understand the value of a roof over their heads." I turned to walk away. "Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne." The reporters were screaming now, but the tone had changed. They weren't accusing anymore. They were apologizing. They were asking for clarity. They were shouting questions about Brad's embezzlement. I didn't stop. I walked back through the heavy oak doors. Reggie followed me and closed them with a solid thud that shut out the noise of the world. We stood in the foyer. The house was quiet. I took a deep breath. "Did you see the look on the reporter's face when the Venmo transactions came up?" Reggie asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "I saw it," I said. But I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about the motel room. I knew exactly what was happening there. The video had done what I couldn't. It had destroyed the alliance. Vanessa wouldn't be comforting Chloe right now. Chloe wouldn't be crying on Brad's shoulder. They would be tearing each other apart. Brad had stolen $200,000 of my money, sure, but in their eyes, he had stolen their money. He had stolen the money Chloe thought was hers. He had stolen the security Vanessa thought she had secured. The press conference was the public execution of their reputation. But the private execution was happening right now in a cheap room with thin walls where three greedy people were finally realizing that when you lie down with dogs, you don't just get fleas. You get eaten alive. I loosened my tie.
Reggie, I said, call the sheriff. Tell him he might want to send a patrol car to the Motel 6 off the interstate.
Why, Reggie asked.
Because I said, walking toward the kitchen to pour myself a drink. I have a feeling there is about to be a domestic disturbance, and for the first time in 5 years, it won't be my problem to fix. The fallout from my press conference didn't take long to reach the rot in the center of their new life. While I was pouring a drink in the quiet sanctuary of my home, the scene inside that cramped, mildew-smelling apartment on the outskirts of Decatur was turning into a war zone. I wasn't there to see it, but the police report, the witness statements from the neighbors, and the sheer predictability of their greed painted a picture so vivid I could see every frame. They had retreated to the apartment after the press conference, huddled together like rats on a sinking ship. They thought the humiliation was the worst part. They thought the public shame was the bottom. But then Vanessa checked her phone. She saw the screenshot of the bank statement I had flashed on the giant LED screen. She saw the numbers. $198,000. She saw the names, Crystal, Tiffany, the Sapphire Club. For a woman like Vanessa, money was the only language she understood, and she just realized that while she was begging me for scraps, her son-in-law had been feasting on the main course. It started with a scream that tore through the thin drywall of the complex. Vanessa didn't just confront Brad, she launched herself at him. She was no longer the composed socialite who sipped tea at the botanical gardens. She was a woman who had lost everything, realizing the thief was sitting on her second-hand sofa drinking a beer. She threw her phone at him. It hit him square in the chest. "You stole it!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the dogs in the complex start barking. "You stole my money. That was my money, Brad. Marcus gave that card to the family. That was our safety net. And you spent it on strippers. You spent it on whores while we are living in this dump." Brad didn't even flinch. He was drunk. Not the fun kind of drunk. The dark, nihilistic kind of drunk that comes when a man knows he has no moves left. He just swatted the phone away and took another swig of his cheap vodka. "Shut up, Vanessa," he mumbled. "You are giving me a headache." "Shut up!" Vanessa lunged at him. She grabbed the lapels of his wrinkled suit jacket, the same suit he had worn to get thrown out of my office. She shook him with a strength born of pure hysteria. "You ruined us. I defended you. I told Marcus you were a genius. I told the world you were the victim, and you were laughing at us. You were buying Cartier bracelets for a girl named Crystal while my daughter was wearing last season's shoes." She slapped him. It was a messy, open-handed slap that left a red mark on his pale cheek. "Give it back," she screamed. "You have it somewhere. You have cash hidden. Give it to me. We need to leave. We need to get out of this city." Brad laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "It is gone, Vanessa," he sneered, pushing her hands off him. "It is all gone. Champagne is expensive. The VIP room isn't free. You, of all people, should know that luxury costs money." Chloe was standing in the corner of the kitchenette. She was trembling. She had watched the press conference, too. She had seen the names on the list. But denial is a powerful drug, and Chloe had been overdosing on it for years. She looked at her husband, the man she thought was her prince, and she tried to find a way to make it not true. "Mom, stop," Chloe whimpered, stepping forward. "He is stressed. Maybe those were business expenses. Maybe he had to entertain clients at those clubs. You know how business works." Vanessa spun around and looked at her daughter like she was insane. "Business expenses," Vanessa yelled. "Sugarbaby.com is not a business expense, you stupid girl. He was cheating on you. He was paying women to sleep with him using your stepfather's money." "Wake up! Don't talk to him like that," Chloe shouted back, her voice cracking. She stepped between Vanessa and Brad, spreading her arms to protect him. "He loves me. We are a team. We are going to get through this. Marcus is just trying to divide us." Brad looked up at Chloe. He looked at her tear-stained face, her messy hair, her desperate, pathetic need to be loved. And something inside him finally snapped. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. He stood up. He swayed slightly on his feet. He looked at Chloe with eyes so cold they could freeze hell over. "Love you," he repeated, his voice dripping with venom. "You think I love you?" Chloe froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Of course you do," she whispered.
We are soulmates. Brad started to laugh again, louder this time. He looked at Vanessa, then back at Chloe. I never loved you, Chloe, he said, stepping closer to her. I tolerated you. There is a difference. You are boring. You are vapid. You have the personality of a wet paper towel. The only thing interesting about you was your last name. Chloe shook her head, tears flying from her eyes. No, Brad, don't say that. You are drunk. I am drunk, Brad agreed. But I am also honest. Finally. Do you really think a guy like me would look at a girl like you if her daddy wasn't Marcus Thorne? I didn't marry you for your looks. I didn't marry you for your mind. I married the access. I married the black card. I married the inheritance. He took a step forward, forcing Chloe to step back. I loved the wallet, Chloe, he spat, pointing a finger in her face. I loved the vacations. I loved the connection. I loved the way doors opened when I said I was your husband. But you were just the admission price, and now that the wallet is closed, you are just a nagging, useless weight around my neck. No, Chloe screamed. She covered her ears. Stop it. You are lying. I am not lying, Brad roared. I spent every dime of that money on women who actually knew how to please a man. Women who didn't whine about their manicures. Women who didn't need their mommy to fight their battles. And it was worth every penny. Vanessa let out a feral growl and charged at him again. You bastard! She clawed at his face, her nails digging into his skin. Brad stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table. He fell, dragging Vanessa down with him. They rolled on the dirty carpet, a tangle of limbs and curses. It was the end of dignity, the end of the upper crust facade. Just two desperate animals fighting in the mud. Stop it, Chloe screamed, diving into the fray to pull her mother off. Brad scrambled to his feet. He was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek. His eyes were wild. He shoved Vanessa away. Then he turned and saw Chloe reaching for him, trying to calm him down. Get off me, he yelled. He shoved her. He didn't just push her away. He shoved her with all the force of his frustration, all the anger of his failure. Chloe flew backward. She wasn't ready for it. She hit the wall hard. Her head cracked against the plaster with a sickening thud. She slid down to the floor and lay there dazed, a trickle of blood starting to mat her hair. The room went silent. Brad stood there breathing heavily, his hands still raised. He looked at Chloe on the floor. He looked at Vanessa, who was staring at him in horror. You hurt her, Vanessa whispered. She tripped. Brad stammered, backing away. I didn't mean to. She tripped, but the silence was broken by a pounding on the door. Not a polite knock. A police knock. Open the door. Police. The neighbors had heard everything. The screaming, the crashing furniture, the thud against the wall. People in that complex didn't call the cops for noise complaints, but they called them for violence. Brad looked at the door. He looked at the window, thinking about running. But they were on the ground floor, and the flashing blue lights were already painting the blinds in a strobe of guilt. The door burst open. The landlord had given them the key. 3 officers stormed in tasers drawn. They saw the scene, the overturned furniture, the broken glass. Vanessa on her knees, bruised and disheveled. Chloe slumped against the wall, bleeding. And Brad standing in the middle of it all, smelling like a distillery. Get on the ground, the lead officer shouted. Brad raised his hands. I can explain, he whimpered. It is a misunderstanding. Do you know who I am? Get on the ground. They tackled him. The man who thought he was too good for this neighborhood was slammed face first into the stained carpet. I imagine the dust tasted bitter. They cuffed his hands behind his back. Vanessa tried to stand up, trying to smooth her torn dress. Officers, she said, trying to summon her society voice, thank God you are here. This man assaulted us. I am Vanessa Thorne. My husband is Marcus Thorne. You need to get me a private car. The officer looked at her. He looked at the wreckage of the apartment. He looked at the empty vodka bottle. Ma'am, you are coming too, he said. We have reports of mutual combat, and we need a statement regarding the disturbance. Chloe was helped up by a paramedic who had followed the police in. She was weeping quietly, holding an ice pack to her head. She looked at Brad as they hauled him up. He didn't look at her. He was crying, begging the officers not to scratch his watch. They were marched out of the apartment. The entire complex had come out to watch. People in bathrobes, people smoking cigarettes on the balconies, kids riding bikes in the parking lot. They all watched as the rich folks were paraded out in handcuffs. There were no paparazzi this time, no glamorous lighting. just the harsh glare of the police cruisers and the cell phone cameras of the neighbors recording the downfall for TikTok. Brad was shoved into the back of a cruiser. He hit his head on the doorframe. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Vanessa was put in another car. She hid her face in her hands, not out of sorrow, but out of shame. She knew this would be on the internet by morning. The real housewives of the slums. Chloe sat in the back of the ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked out the window at the flashing lights. The illusion was gone. The husband who loved her was a myth. The mother who protected her was a mess. The stepfather who paid for it all was gone. I sat in my study miles away. My phone buzzed. It was Reggie. "It is done," the text read. "Brad arrested for domestic battery. Vanessa detained for disorderly conduct. Chloe is being treated for a concussion. The landlord is evicting them for the damage." I put the phone down. I walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful night. I didn't feel happy. You don't feel happy when you watch a building collapse, even if you ordered the demolition. You just feel the weight of the dust settling. They had wanted to be independent. They had wanted to live without my rules. Well, they had their wish. They were free of me. But they were prisoners of their own choices. Brad and Chloe were broken. Not just their marriage, but their spirits. The fracture was complete. And all it took was a little bit of pressure and the removal of the one thing that had glued them together, my money. I turned off the lights. It was time to sleep. Tomorrow was a new day, and I had a feeling it would be a very quiet one. Finally. The clock on the dashboard of my truck clicked from 4:59 to 5 o'clock. It was Friday. The deadline had arrived. The 48 hours I had given them to vacate the premises had dissolved into history, just like my marriage. I wasn't alone. Parked next to me was Sheriff Jim Miller, a man I had known since we played high school football together in the mud of East Atlanta. Jim wasn't there as a favor. He was there as an officer of the law to enforce a court order issued by the trustees of the Eliza Thorne estate. I stepped out of the truck. The heavy thud of my boots on the pavement was the only sound in the humid afternoon air. The birds had stopped singing, as if they knew that the time for noise was over and the time for judgment had begun. Jim stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his belt. He didn't look happy. No man enjoys evicting a woman, even if that woman deserves it. We walked up the long driveway together. The house looked different. Just a week ago, it had been a fortress of arrogance glowing with lights and laughter. Now it looked like a tomb. There were drag marks on the gravel where moving trucks had hastily loaded boxes. A few discarded items, a broken lamp, a torn dress bag littered the lawn debris from a ship that had sunk fast. Jim reached the front door first. He didn't knock. The time for knocking was over. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. We pushed the double doors open. The air inside was stale. It smelled of cardboard and panic. The foyer, usually pristine, was a mess of packing tape and dust bunnies. And there, sitting on a suitcase in the middle of the grand hallway, was Vanessa. She looked up as we entered. I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who had spent 5 years looking down her nose at waiters and clerks was gone. In her place was a frantic, disheveled creature. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, clothes I hadn't seen her wear since before we were married. Her eyes were red and swollen, rimmed with dark circles that no concealer could hide. She didn't stand up. She couldn't. She just looked at me, and then she looked at the sheriff. "It is 5 o'clock, Vanessa," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't bounce off the walls. It was absorbed by the emptiness of the house. "Marcus," she whispered. Her voice was cracked dry. "Marcus, please. I have nowhere to go. The motels are full. My credit cards are still frozen. You can't do this." I walked past her. I wasn't there to negotiate. I was there to inspect the asset. I walked into the living room. The paintings were gone, leaving pale rectangles on the walls like ghosts. The furniture was still there. The trust owned that, but the decorative pillows, the vases, the trinkets she had cluttered the space with were gone. It felt like the house could finally breathe again. Jim cleared his throat from the doorway. "Mrs. Thorne." Jim said, his voice professional but firm. "You have been served with an eviction notice. The deadline has passed. You are now trespassing on private property owned by the Eliza Thorne Trust. I need to ask you to vacate the premises immediately." Vanessa scrambled to her feet. She rushed toward me, not with anger this time, but with a desperation that was painful to watch. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her fingernails digging into my jacket. Marcus, listen to me, she pleaded, the words tumbling out of her mouth. I know I messed up. I know I said terrible things, but it wasn't me. It was Brad. He manipulated me. He told me you were holding us back. He told me he was going to make us billions. I was scared, Marcus. I was just trying to protect my daughter. You know how mothers are. I was blinded by him. I looked down at her hand on my arm. I didn't shake it off. I just looked at it until she felt the coldness of my stare and slowly let go. You were blinded? I asked. Yes, she cried, nodding frantically. Brad is a sociopath. You saw the bank statements. You saw what he did. He stole from you, and he stole from me emotionally. I am a victim here too, Marcus. I am just a woman who trusted the wrong man. But you are my husband. You promised to take care of me. Please give me another chance. I will sign anything. I will go to counseling. Just don't throw me out like this. She fell to her knees. It was a theatrical gesture, something she probably saw in a movie once. She clutched the hem of my jacket, sobbing into the fabric. I looked at Jim. He had turned away, giving us a moment of privacy, embarrassed by the display. I looked down at the top of Vanessa's head. I remembered the day I married her. I remembered thinking I had found a partner for my twilight years. I remembered how she smiled when I signed the deed that let her live here. And then I remembered the dinner. I remembered the sneer on her face when she told me to stay in my lane. I remembered the way she sipped her wine while her daughter insulted me. I remembered the silence when I asked for help. Get up, Vanessa, I said. She looked up, hope flashing in her eyes. She thought she had broken me. She thought the tears worked. I stepped back out of her reach. You are right about one thing, I said. Brad is a bad man. He is a thief and a liar. But he didn't make you say those things at dinner. He didn't make you look at me with contempt for 5 years. He didn't make you treat the staff like dirt. He didn't make you cheat on me with a personal trainer. Vanessa flinched. She opened her mouth to deny it, to spin another lie, but the look in my eyes stopped her. She knew I knew everything. And you say you were protecting your daughter? I asked, my voice dropping to a low rumble. You say you were just being a mother? Yes, she whispered. I love her. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. If you loved her, you would have taught her gratitude. If you loved her, you would have taught her that money is earned, not owed. But you didn't. You taught her that men like me are resources to be exploited. You taught her that appearance matters more than character. I leaned down so my face was level with hers. Do you remember what you told me at the table, Vanessa? Do you remember the specific instruction you gave me when I tried to explain the value of $1 to Chloe? She stared at me, trembling. She knew. You said she is not your daughter. Don't correct her. I stood up straight, towering over her. Well, Vanessa, I am listening to you. I am respecting your wishes. I am not correcting her. I am not saving her. I am not bailing her out of jail, and I am not paying for her lawyer, and I am certainly not saving you. But she is hurt. Vanessa wailed. She is in the hospital. Then go to her, I said. Go to the hospital. Sit by her bed. And when she wakes up and asks why her life fell apart, you can tell her the truth. Tell her it fell apart because her mother valued a country club membership more than a good man. I turned to Jim. Sheriff, I said. The property is ready to be secured. Jim stepped forward. Mrs. Thorne, it is time. Vanessa looked around the empty hallway one last time. She realized there was no white knight coming. There was no last-minute reprieve. The play was over. The curtain had fallen and the lights were out. She stood up slowly. She picked up her suitcase. It was heavy, but I didn't offer to carry it. I wasn't the porter anymore. She walked to the door. She paused on the threshold, the evening light framing her silhouette. She looked back at me. I loved you, Marcus. She lied. I know, I said. You loved what I could do for you. Goodbye, Vanessa. She walked out. Jim followed her, closing the heavy oak door with a click that sounded like a gunshot. I heard him lock it. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I was alone in the house. I walked through the rooms one last time. I walked into the kitchen where we used to eat breakfast in silence. I walked into the library where I used to sit alone while she hosted her parties. The ghosts of the last 5 years were fading. The house felt lighter. It felt like it was preparing itself for the children who would be coming soon. The orphans who would fill these rooms with noise and life, who wouldn't care about the brand of the furniture but who would be grateful for the safety of the walls. I walked out the back door, locking it behind me. I walked to my truck. Jim was waiting by his cruiser. Vanessa was gone, likely in a taxi heading to the hospital or another motel. You okay, Marcus? Jim asked, leaning against the hood of his car. I took a deep breath of the evening air. It smelled of rain and pine needles. "I am better than okay, Jim," I said. "I am free." I climbed into my truck. I didn't look back at the mansion. It wasn't my home anymore. It was just a building. My home was the cabin by the lake. My home was the peace of mind that comes from knowing you stood your ground. I started the engine. As I drove down the long driveway past the gate that was now closed and locked, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The eviction was complete. The parasites were gone, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus Thorne was driving toward a future that belonged only to him. You might wonder why I didn't fight harder to keep the furniture. You might wonder why a man who built his fortune on details would leave a house full of antiques paintings and Persian rugs to a woman who had just betrayed him. The answer is simple. I didn't. The house Jim sealed off yesterday was a shell. It was a stage set. The real assets, the things that actually mattered, had been sitting in a climate-controlled storage unit in Sandy Springs for over a month. I have been in construction for 40 years. I know that before a building collapses, there are signs. Cracks in the drywall, doors that don't close right, the smell of rot in the basement. I smelled the rot in my marriage 6 months ago. That was when I started the renovation. I told Vanessa I was sending the expensive pieces out for restoration. I told her the humidity in the house was damaging the oil paintings. She didn't care. As long as there was something hanging on the wall that looked expensive, she was happy. So piece by piece, I swapped them. The Ming vase she broke, a $90 replica from Chinatown. The rug in the living room, a synthetic copy I ordered online. The painting's high-quality prints on canvas. For a woman who claimed to have such refined taste, Vanessa couldn't tell the difference between a masterpiece and a mirror image. She lived on the surface of things, so she never noticed that the substance was gone. But there was one asset class I didn't touch, her closet. Vanessa called it her investment portfolio. While I bought stocks and land, she bought leather, Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton. She had a collection of handbags that she claimed was worth $500,000. She used to tell me that if anything ever happened, those bags were her safety net. She was right about the value, but she was wrong about the security. It was Saturday morning. Vanessa was sitting in a cheap coffee shop near the hospital where Chloe was being treated for her concussion. She was drinking tap water because she couldn't afford a latte. She had spent her last cash on the taxi. She needed money, and she needed it now. She needed a lawyer for Brad, not because she loved him, but because she needed him to take the blame. She needed a deposit for an apartment. She needed to buy back her dignity. She looked at the orange Hermes Birkin bag sitting on the chair next to her. It was crocodile skin with gold hardware. She had bought it 3 years ago for $45,000. She remembered the day clearly. Brad had been with her. He had encouraged her to buy it. He said it was an heirloom. She picked up the bag. It felt heavy. It felt like salvation. She walked 3 blocks to Golden Loan. It wasn't a dirty pawn shop with bars on the windows. It was a high-end collateral lender, the kind of place that quietly turned the mistakes of the rich into liquid cash. She walked in with her head high. She was still Vanessa Thorne, even if her dress was wrinkled. "I need to liquidate an asset," she told the man behind the counter. His name was Solomon. He had been in the business for 30 years. He wore a jeweler's loop around his neck and had eyes that had seen every lie Atlanta had to offer. He looked at Vanessa. He recognized her. He had seen the news. He knew exactly who she was and exactly why she was there. "Let us see what you have, Mrs. Thorne," Solomon said, his voice neutral. Vanessa placed the bag on the velvet pad on the counter. She handled it like it was the Holy Grail. "This is a Himalayan Birkin," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is currently trading for $60,000 on the secondary market. I am willing to let it go for 40. Cash. Today." Solomon didn't say anything. He put on white cotton gloves. He pulled the bag toward him. He opened the clasp. He inspected the stitching. He took out a small flashlight and looked inside the lining. He smelled the leather. Vanessa tapped her fingers on the glass. "Hurry up," she said. "I have an appointment." Solomon put the bag down. He took off his gloves. He looked at Vanessa with a strange expression. It wasn't greed. It was pity. "Mrs. Thorne," he said gently, "I cannot buy this bag." Vanessa scoffed. "What do you mean? You don't have the liquidity?" "I can go to another shop. This is a rare item." "It is not a question of liquidity," Solomon said. "It is a question of authenticity." Vanessa froze. Authenticity. "Are you joking?" I bought this at the boutique in Buckhead. I have the receipt at home. I am sure you did buy a bag like this once, Solomon said, but this is not that bag. He turned the bag around and pointed to the stitching near the handle. Look here, he said. The stitching on a real Hermes is done by hand. It has a slight angle. This stitching is straight. It was done by a machine. And the hardware. It is plated zinc, not gold. The weight is off by nearly 200 grams. Vanessa's face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. This is insane. Marcus put you up to this, didn't he? He called you and told you not to buy from me. Solomon sighed. He reached under the counter and pulled out a pair of scissors. If this is real crocodile skin, Mrs. Thorne, these scissors will not easily pierce it. If it is embossed cow leather from a factory in Shenzhen, it will cut like paper. May I? Vanessa hesitated, but her arrogance pushed her forward. Go ahead, she challenged. You are going to owe me $60,000 when you ruin it. Solomon didn't hesitate. He took the strap and snipped. It sliced through effortlessly, revealing a white, foamy interior, Plastic Solomon said. Vanessa stared at the cut strap. She couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. But that is impossible, she whispered. It has been in my closet. I keep it in the dust bag. She stopped. A memory flashed in her mind. 6 months ago. Brad. Brad had come to her with a smile. Vanessa, you know insurance premiums are going up. We need to get your collection appraised and professionally cleaned. I have a guy. He can do the whole closet for a discount. She had thanked him. She had thought he was being a dutiful son-in-law. She had let him load 10 of her most expensive bags into his car. He brought them back 2 days later, all in their dust bags, looking shiny and perfect. She grabbed the bag from the counter, clutching the ruined strap. Brad, she hissed. Solomon nodded slowly. We see it often, Mrs. Thorne. The superfake market is very sophisticated. A family member takes the real item, sells it for cash, and replaces it with a high-end replica that costs maybe $500. The owner never notices until they try to sell it. Vanessa grabbed her other bag, a Chanel flat bag she was using as her purse. She dumped the contents on the counter. Her lipstick, her wallet, her keys clattered out. Check this one, she screamed. Check it. Solomon didn't need the loop this time. He just felt the leather. Synthetic, he said. Good quality, but synthetic. Vanessa screamed. It was a sound of pure primal loss. She swept the fake bags off the counter. She fell to the floor of the pawn shop, surrounded by the lies she had been carrying around on her arm. He sold them, she sobbed. He sold them all. $200,000 on the credit card was just the tip of the iceberg. Brad had been liquidating her life for months. Every time he complimented her style, every time he admired her collection, he was calculating the resale value. He had stripped her clean while she was sleeping and left her holding a bag full of plastic foam. I was sitting in my truck at the construction site when Solomon called me. We had known each other for years. He told me what happened. She is on the floor, Marcus Solomon said. She is broken. She tried to sell me a piece of plastic for 40 grand. The boy took everything. I listened to the hum of the excavator engine. Did you give her anything, I asked? I gave her a bottle of water, Solomon said. And I called a cab. She can't stay here. Thank you, Solomon, I said. I hung up. I thought about the house. I thought about the fake Ming vase. I thought about the fake paintings. And now the fake bags. Vanessa had spent her whole life chasing status. She wanted the label. She wanted the logo. She wanted the world to look at her and see value. But she never cared about what was inside. She never checked the stitching. She married a man for his potential wealth without checking his character. She raised a daughter to value money over respect. She built a life on a foundation of appearances. And now at the end of the road, she found out that the only real thing in her life was the man she had thrown away. The irony was perfect. She left me because she thought I was cheap. She thought I was holding her back from the luxury she deserved. And now she was sitting on a dirty floor in a pawn shop, realizing that the luxury she worshipped was just a cheap imitation manufactured in a factory, sold by a con artist and bought by a fool. The hidden asset wasn't the gold or the cash I had moved out. The hidden asset was the truth. It had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the moment when the light hit it just right. And today, under the fluorescent lights of a pawn shop, the truth finally shined. Everything she had was fake, except the pain. The pain was 100% authentic. Here is part 14 of the script, written in English, optimized for voice-over narration, with the tone and length you requested. They say that nature abhors a vacuum. When you remove something, something else rushes in to fill the space. I had removed the noise. I had removed the greed. I had removed the parasites that had been feeding on my life for 5 years. My house was empty. My schedule was clear. My bank accounts were secure. But a man does not build an empire just to let it collect dust. A man builds an empire to pass it on. For years, Vanessa and Brad had circled me like vultures waiting for me to die. They measured my health in potential inheritance tax. They looked at my company and saw a piggy bank. They looked at the Eliza Thorne Trust and saw a real estate portfolio. They never looked at the work. They never saw the sweat in the concrete or the soul in the blueprints. They thought the legacy was the money. They were wrong. The legacy is the mission, and you cannot leave a mission to people who only care about themselves. On Monday morning, 3 days after the eviction, I walked into my office at Thorne Construction. The mood was different. The team knew what had happened. News travels fast in Atlanta, especially when it involves police cars and public humiliation. But nobody asked me about it. Sarah just handed me my coffee with a little extra warmth in her smile. Big Mike gave me a firm nod as he headed out to the site. They respected my privacy. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a tentative, fearful knock like Brad used to give. It was 3 solid raps, confident, respectful. "Come in," I said. The door opened, and Jamal entered. Jamal Williams is 28 years old. He has skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that don't miss a single detail. He was wearing steel-toed boots, clean jeans, and a collared shirt with the company logo on the chest. He held a roll of blueprints under his arm like a soldier holding a rifle. Jamal wasn't a stranger. 10 years ago, I was inspecting a site in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Decatur. I saw a skinny kid sitting on a pile of bricks reading a calculus textbook while other kids were running the streets. I asked him what he was doing. He told me he was trying to figure out the load-bearing capacity of the bridge we were building. He was 18. He had no father, a mother who worked 2 shifts, and a brain that was hungry for a way out. I didn't give him money. I gave him a job. I told him if he swept the floors and carried the lumber, I would pay for his books. When he got into Georgia Tech, I paid for his tuition, not from a family account, but from my private funds. Vanessa never knew about him. Chloe never knew he existed. While they were buying purses, Jamal was buying physics books. While Brad was learning how to bullshit investors, Jamal was learning how to pour foundation that would last 100 years. Morning, Mr. Thorne. Jamal said, his voice deep and steady. I have the revised schematics for the hospital wing. I found a way to reduce the steel budget by 6% without compromising structural integrity. He unrolled the plans on my desk. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the scandal. He focused on the work. That is what I loved about him. He honored the work. I looked at the blueprints. They were perfect. Clean lines, smart calculations, the mind of an engineer with the heart of a builder. Sit down, Jamal, I said. He hesitated. He looked at the chair, the same chair Brad had sat in when he demanded a job he wasn't qualified for. Jamal sat on the edge of the seat, respectful, ready to stand up if needed. The plans are good, I said, but that is not why I called you in here. Jamal nodded. Is there a problem with the site, sir? No, I said. The site is fine. The problem is the future. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick leather binder. It wasn't a construction contract, it was a succession plan. I watched Jamal's face. He didn't know what was coming. He expected a promotion, maybe a raise. He didn't expect the world. Jamal, I said, leaning back. Do you know why I fired my son-in-law? Jamal looked down at his hands. I heard he wasn't a good fit for the company culture, sir. That is a polite way of saying he was a thief and a fool, I said. Brad thought he deserved this company because he married into my house. He thought leadership was a birthright. But you and I know the truth, don't we? I pointed to his boots. We know that leadership starts at the bottom, I continued. It starts with the broom. It starts with the shovel. You have swept the floors, Jamal. You have poured the cement. You have done the math. You have earned every inch of ground you stand on. I slid the binder across the desk. Open it. Jamal opened the leather cover. He read the first page. His eyes widened. He stopped breathing for a second. He looked up at me, then back at the paper, then back at me. "Mr. Thorne," he whispered. This designates me as the chief operating officer and the primary trustee of the Eliza Thorne estate." "That is correct," I said. "But, sir, this transfers voting control of the company to me upon your retirement. This puts me in charge of the assets, the charitable giving, the new orphanage project." I nodded. "It is a lot of responsibility. Do you think you can handle it?" Jamal shook his head slowly. "Sir, this is everything. Why me? You have family. I mean, I know things are complicated right now, but..." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. "I don't have family, Jamal," I said softly. "I have relatives. There is a difference. Relatives are the people who share your DNA. Family are the people who share your values." I turned back to him. "For 10 years I have watched you. I watched you study when you were tired. I watched you send money home to your mother every single week. I watched you stay late on job sites to make sure the safety rails were secure, not because I paid you extra, but because you cared about the men working there. You have honor, Jamal. You have a code." I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Brad wanted to use this company to buy Ferraris. You want to use this company to build hospitals. That is why it is you. It has to be you. Because if I leave this to them, they will sell it for parts within a year. If I leave it to you, it will stand for another 50 years. Jamal looked at the document. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He wasn't thinking about the money he would make. He was thinking about the burden he was accepting. "I won't let you down, Marcus," he said. It was the first time he had ever called me by my first name. It wasn't disrespectful. It was the shift of a relationship from master and apprentice to father and son. "I know you won't," I said. "There is one more thing," I added. "The house, the one on Peachtree." Jamal looked up. "The one the police just raided?" "Yes," I said. "The trust is converting it into a home for boys. Boys like you were. Boys who have potential but no path. I want you to oversee the renovation. I want you to tear out the marble floors Vanessa loves so much and put in hardwood that can handle kids running. I want you to turn the wine cellar into a library. I want you to take the vanity out of that house and put the heart back in." Jamal smiled, a genuine, bright smile that lit up the room. "I have some ideas for that," he said. "We can turn the garage into a workshop. Teach them trade skills, carpentry, welding. Give them a trade before they even graduate high school." I smiled back. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. I picked up a pen and handed it to him. "Sign it, Jamal. Let's get to work." He signed the papers. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the sound of a new era beginning. It was the sound of justice. While Brad was sitting in a holding cell blaming the world for his failures, Jamal was sitting in the corner office accepting the reward for his integrity. Vanessa had always said that Jamal was just one of my little charity cases. She used to roll her eyes when I mentioned his grades. She saw a black kid in work boots and saw a laborer. She never looked close enough to see the king hiding inside. That afternoon, I introduced Jamal to the senior staff. Big Mike shook his hand and nearly crushed it with enthusiasm. Sarah hugged him. There was no resentment, no whispers of nepotism. Everyone in that room knew Jamal. They knew he was the first one in and the last one out. They knew he deserved it. As I watched him shake hands, looking confident and humble, I realized something. I hadn't lost a son when I kicked Brad out. I had simply cleared the space to acknowledge the son I already had. The true heir isn't the one who waits for the will to be read. The true heir is the one who helps you write it. I walked out of the conference room and left them to it. I had a meeting with the sheriff about the final details of the restraining orders, but for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't walking with a heavy heart. I was walking light. My legacy was safe. My house was being repurposed, and the parasites were gone. The king hadn't just returned to his throne, he had chosen his successor. And this time he chose blood that was thicker than water, the blood of shared struggle and shared dreams. 6 months have passed since the day the locks were changed on the Peachtree estate. In the construction business, 6 months is enough time to pour a foundation frame, a structure, and put a roof over it. It is enough time to build something new. But as I have learned, 6 months is also enough time for a poorly built structure to collapse completely under its own weight. I don't track them, I don't follow their social media, I don't ask mutual acquaintances how they are doing. I don't have to. The city of Atlanta is big, but circles are small, and the echoes of their crash are still bouncing off the walls of the society they used to desperate to be part of. Let's start with Vanessa, the woman who once demanded a $25,000 monthly allowance to maintain her lifestyle is now living on a budget that wouldn't cover her old dry cleaning bill. She lives in a studio apartment in a complex near the airport. It is a noisy, transient place where the planes roar overhead every 3 minutes, shaking the thin windows. Her view isn't a manicured garden anymore. It is a parking lot filled with rental cars. I know this because my lawyer Reggie had to send a courier there to deliver the final divorce decree. The courier told me that when Vanessa opened the door, the smell of burnt onions from the neighbor's unit wafted out. The apartment was barely 400 square feet. Her bed was in the living room. Her kitchen was a hot plate in the corner. But the real tragedy isn't where she lives. It is what she does. Vanessa, the woman who claimed she was too refined to work, the woman who looked down on the staff who cleaned her floors, is now a sales representative for a multi-level marketing cosmetics company. She walks door to door in neighborhoods she used to sneer at, carrying a heavy case filled with cheap creams and lipsticks that promise eternal youth. Last week she tried to sell her products at a local salon. She didn't know that the owner of the salon was the sister of one of my foremen. She walked in wearing the suit that was 3 seasons old and slightly too loose because she had lost weight from stress. She started her pitch. She put on that fake bright smile, the same smile she used to give me when she wanted money. She told the women in the salon that she was an entrepreneur. She told them she was building her own empire. She tried to sell them a $30 face wash. One of the customers recognized her. It was a woman named Brenda, a former friend from the charity board. Brenda didn't say hello. She didn't ask how Vanessa was. She just looked at the cheap plastic case in Vanessa's hand and then looked at her own diamond watch. She told Vanessa that she only uses medical-grade skincare and asked the salon owner to escort the solicitor out. Vanessa was thrown out. Not by police this time, but by the social judgment she had spent her whole life fearing. She stood on the sidewalk clutching her case of unsold makeup while the women inside laughed. She is learning that dignity isn't something you buy at a boutique. It is something you earn. And right now, her account is overdrawn. Then there is Brad, the visionary, the disruptor, the man who was going to change the world with his app and his synergy. Brad is currently residing in a state facility about 2 hours south of the city. He isn't wearing Italian wool anymore. He is wearing Department of Corrections orange. It turns out that stealing $200,000 from me was just the beginning of his problems. When I exposed his spending habits at the press conference, the other investors, the ones he claimed to have lined up, started looking at their own books. They found holes, massive gaping holes where their money should have been. Brad hadn't just been using my money for bottle service and jewelry. He had been running a Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from new investors to pay off the interest for old ones, all while skimming the top for himself. The trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't see a young misunderstood genius. They saw a con artist. I went to the sentencing hearing. I didn't sit in the front row. I stood in the back in the shadows. I wanted to see him one last time. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Brad didn't apologize. He didn't show remorse. He cried. He blamed the economy. He blamed the pressure. He even tried to blame me, saying that if I had just supported him more, he wouldn't have been forced to cut corners. The judge wasn't impressed. He gave him 5 years for wire fraud and embezzlement. As the bailiff led him away, Brad looked into the gallery. He was searching for someone. Maybe Chloe, maybe Vanessa. But they weren't there. He saw me. Our eyes locked for a second. In his eyes, I saw the terrifying realization that there was no one left to charm. There was no one left to manipulate. He was going to a place where his vocabulary of buzzwords wouldn't save him. He wanted to be a big fish. Well, he is in a very small tank now. And finally, Chloe. Of all of them, Chloe is the one who haunts me the most. Not because I miss her, but because she is the perfect example of wasted potential. She had the best education money could buy. She had tutors. She had art classes. She had every door held open for her. Now she pushes those doors open with her hip while balancing a tray of burgers and fries. Chloe is working at a diner called the Silver Skillet on 14th Street. It is a blue-collar joint, good food, cheap coffee, and hard floors. It is the kind of place where construction workers go for breakfast before the sun comes up. I know this because I built it. 20 years ago, my crew poured the foundation for that diner. We framed the walls, we hung the lights. There is a small brass plaque by the door tarnished by time that says Built by Thorn Construction 1998. Chloe walks past that plaque 50 times a day. She dropped out of her master's program 2 weeks after the eviction. The university wouldn't let her continue without payment, and she certainly couldn't pay. She tried to find a job in an art gallery, but without the Thorn name attached to her resume, nobody was interested in an assistant with no experience and an attitude problem. So she took the only job she could get. She wears a polyester uniform that smells like grease. Her hair, once blown out at the best salons, is tied back in a messy ponytail. Her nails, which used to be long and perfectly painted, are short and chipped. A friend of mine, a project manager named Sam, saw her there last Tuesday. He said she looked tired. Not the tired of a bad night's sleep, but the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who is on their feet for 10 hours a day for minimum wage plus tips. Sam sat in her section. She didn't recognize him. She came over to the table, pulling a notepad from her apron. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a recommendation. She just asked what he wanted. Sam ordered the special. When she brought it, she spilled a little bit of coffee on the table. In her old life, if a waiter had done that, Chloe would have demanded to see the manager. She would have called the server incompetent. She would have made a scene. But this time, she just flinched. She looked terrified. She grabbed a rag and started wiping it up, apologizing profusely. "I am so sorry," she stammered. "Please don't tell the owner. I can't lose this shift. I need the tips for rent." Sam told me he looked at her hands. They were red and chapped from the sanitizer and the dishwater. He saw a bandage on her finger. He left her a $20 tip on a $10 check. He said she looked at that $20 bill like it was a gold bar. She almost cried. $20. That used to be what she spent on a green juice. Now it was her grocery budget for 2 days. The irony is not lost on me. Chloe is finally working in a building I built. She is finally serving the kind of men I worked with my whole life. She is finally understanding that the food on the table doesn't appear by magic. It appears because someone sweat for it. She is living the life she mocked. She is serving the class of people she despised. And every time she walks through that front door, she has to look at my name on the wall. I don't wish them harm. I really don't. I don't want them to starve or to suffer physically. But I do find a deep, quiet satisfaction in the symmetry of it all. The universe has a way of balancing the books. Vanessa wanted beauty, so she is selling lies to cover up flaws. Brad wanted to be a captive audience, so he is now literally a captive. Chloe wanted to be served, so she is now serving others. They are all exactly where they belong. They are living the consequences of their character. Meanwhile, I am sitting on the porch of my cabin. Jamal called me this morning. The renovation on the orphanage is ahead of schedule. He found a way to preserve the old oak tree in the front yard, the one Eliza planted. He said the boys are already signing up for the carpentry workshop. I hung up the phone and looked at the lake. The water was calm. The air was clean. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted better than any vintage wine I ever drank at that mahogany table. I have lost a wife, a stepdaughter, and a son-in-law. But I have gained a son, a legacy, and my freedom. The ledger is balanced. The debt is paid. And for the first time in my life, I am not building for someone else. I am just living. And that, my friends, is the richest feeling in the world. The mist was rising off the surface of the lake, swirling like white smoke against the dark green of the pines. It was 6 a.m. At this hour, the only sound in the world was the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the occasional splash of a bass jumping for a fly. There were no sirens here. There were no reporters shouting questions. There were no cell phones buzzing with demands for money. There was just the water, the trees, and the old wooden dock that I had built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. I sat on a folding canvas chair, a thermos of black coffee beside me. My hands, once calloused from laying bricks and later softened by years of signing checks, were rough again. I was holding my favorite fishing rod, an old, ugly stick that had seen more sunrises than most people have seen paychecks. This cabin was the one thing Vanessa hated the most. She called it the shack. She refused to sleep here because there was no room service, the sheets were cotton instead of silk, and the internet connection was spotty. She said it smelled like old wood and bait. She was right. It did. To me, that is the smell of freedom. To her, it was the smell of poverty. She never understood that you can be poor in a palace and rich in a shack. I cast my line out. The lure hit the water with a soft plop, sending ripples outward in perfect concentric circles. I watched them expand, fading into the glass-like surface of the lake. For the last 5 years, my life had been a hurricane. I was constantly moving, constantly fixing, constantly paying. I was the captain of a ship that was taking on water, running from leak to leak, trying to keep a crew afloat that was drilling holes in the hull. But now the ship had gone down. The rats had swum away, and I was sitting on the shore watching the sun paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway behind the cabin. I didn't turn around. I knew the sound of that engine. It wasn't a sleek sports car or a luxury SUV. It was a Ford F-150, reliable and sturdy. I heard a car door close. Then the heavy, deliberate footsteps of work boots on the wooden planks of the dock. Jamal walked up beside me. He didn't say a word. He just set down a paper bag that smelled like fresh biscuits and sausage. He unfolded the second canvas chair, the one I kept in the shed, and sat down. He opened his own thermos. The steam rose up and joined the mist on the lake. We sat there for 20 minutes in absolute silence. That is the thing about Jamal. He knows the value of silence. Brad used to fill every second with noise, talking about synergy and disruption and potential. He was afraid of silence because in the silence you have to face yourself. Jamal is comfortable in his own skin. "Nice cast," Jamal said quietly, watching my line bob in the water. "The wind is right today," I replied. We watched a heron take flight from the reeds on the far bank, its massive wings beating slowly against the air. "I saw the report from the site manager," I said, keeping my eyes on the water. "You finished the framing on the orphanage 3 days early." Jamal took a sip of his coffee. "The crew is motivated. They know what they are building. It is different when you are building a home for kids instead of a shopping mall. The energy is different." I nodded. "It is." He reached into the paper bag and handed me a biscuit wrapped in foil. "Eat Pops," he said. "You are losing weight." I took the biscuit. It was warm. Pops. He had started calling me that a few weeks ago. It wasn't a title he used to get something. It was a title he used because he felt it. And hearing it from him meant more to me than hearing it from Chloe ever could have. Jamal watched me eat for a moment, then he looked out at the lake. His face was serious. He had that furrow in his brow that he gets when he is calculating a load-bearing wall or a complex equation. "Can I ask you something, Pops?" he asked. I chewed slowly and swallowed. "You can ask me anything, son, except for my fishing spot coordinates." "Those go to the grave." He smiled a little, but it faded quickly. "Are you sad?" he asked. I looked at him. "I mean really sad," Jamal continued. "I drove past the estate yesterday. It is empty. The garden is overgrown. The lights are off. That was your life for 5 years. You had a wife. You had a daughter in a way. You had a full house. And now, you are here. Alone." He gestured to the small cabin behind us with its peeling paint and mossy roof. "Don't you feel like you lost?" he asked. "I mean, I know they were toxic. I know they deserved it. But still, it is a lot of money, a lot of time, gone." I set the biscuit down on the small table between us. I reeled in my line a few feet, teasing the fish, feeling the tension of the water. I thought about his question. I thought about the nights I spent sleeping in the guest room because Vanessa was angry I wouldn't buy her a new car. I thought about the dinners where I was ignored. I thought about the way Chloe used to roll her eyes when I told a story. "Jamal," I said, my voice low and raspy, "let me tell you something about loss." I pointed to the tackle box at my feet. It was rusted and dented. "I lost a lure this morning. A good one. Cost me $5. It got snagged on a log underwater and the line snapped. Am I sad about that lure?" Jamal shook his head. "No. You can buy another one." "Exactly," I said. "Money is like that lure. You can always buy another one. You can always earn more. I lost money on Vanessa, sure. I lost the cost of the wedding. I lost the cost of the cars. I lost the cost of the renovation. But that is just paper. It is green paper with dead presidents on it. You can print more of it. Losing money is annoying, but it doesn't break a man." I looked at Jamal, locking eyes with him. "But sadness. Sadness comes from losing something you can't replace. Sadness comes from losing your dignity. Sadness comes from losing your self-respect." I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. "For 5 years I was losing my self-respect, Jamal. Every time I let her talk down to me, I lost a piece of myself. Every time I let Brad treat me like an ATM, I lost a piece of my manhood. Every time I let Chloe ignore me, I lost a piece of my heart. I was bleeding out, drop by drop." I turned back to the lake. "So to answer your question, no, I am not sad. I felt a tug on the line, a strong one. The tip of the rod bent. I didn't jerk it. I waited. You know what I feel, I asked. What Jamal whispered. I feel light, I said. I started to reel in the fish. It was fighting, but I was patient. I feel like I have been carrying a bag of wet cement on my shoulders for 5 years, I said, watching the line cut through the water. I carried it up the stairs. I carried it to dinner. I carried it to bed. It was so heavy, Jamal. It was crushing my spine. And I thought I had to carry it. I thought that was my job. I thought that was what being a husband meant. The fish broke the surface, a largemouth bass glistening green and gold in the morning sun. It splashed, fighting for its freedom. But then I continued. I realized I could just put it down. I could just drop the bag. And when I dropped it, I pulled the fish onto the dock. It flopped on the wet wood, full of life and energy. When I dropped it, I didn't fall. I floated. I reached down and carefully removed the hook from the fish's lip. I held it in my hands for a second, admiring its strength. It was a survivor, just like me. I lowered the fish back into the water. It stayed there for a second, catching its breath, and then with a flick of its tail, it disappeared into the deep, dark water. Gone. Free. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I am not lonely, Jamal, I said. I have this lake. I have this cabin. I have my work. And I have you. I looked at him. You are the son I should have had 40 years ago. You are the legacy. And this. I swept my hand across the horizon, taking in the trees, the water, the rising sun. This is peace, and peace is expensive, son. It cost me a mansion and a marriage to buy this peace. But sitting here right now eating a cold biscuit with you, I think I got a bargain. Jamal smiled. A real smile. He understood. He reached into the bag and pulled out another biscuit. It is sausage and egg, he said. Sarah made them. She said if you don't eat both, she is coming down here to drag you back to the office herself. I laughed. A deep belly laugh that scared a flock of ducks off the water. Don't mess with Sarah, I said, taking the biscuit. We sat there as the sun fully rose, burning off the last of the mist. The world was bright and clear. The shadows were gone. I thought about Vanessa in her studio apartment. I thought about Brad in his cell. I thought about Chloe in the diner. I hoped they would find their own peace one day. I hoped they would learn that you can't build a life on a foundation of lies. But that wasn't my job anymore. My job was finished. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. So Pops, Jamal said, picking up his own fishing rod. Are we going to catch anything today, or are we just going to talk philosophy? I opened one eye. The fish are biting, I said. But you have to be patient. You have to wait for the right moment. Just like life, Jamal said. Just like life, I agreed. I watched him cast his line. He had good form, strong, precise. He didn't need me to teach him how to fish anymore. He was ready. And as I sat there in the quiet morning of my new life, I realized that I wasn't an old man at the end of his story. I was a man who had just turned the page to the best chapter yet. The chapter where the hero stops fighting dragons and finally gets to rest in the garden he built. I am Marcus Thorne. I built skyscrapers. I built a fortune. But the hardest thing I ever built was my own self-respect. And looking at the calm water of the lake, I knew that this was a masterpiece that would last forever. They say that when you build a house, the most important part is the foundation because nobody sees it. For 5 years, I was the foundation of a family that didn't know I existed. They walked on my floors. They slept under my roof. They ate at my table. But they never looked down to see what was holding them up. They thought the floor was magic. They thought the roof was guaranteed. They thought the food just appeared. They treated the foundation like dirt, stomping on it, dirtying it, and eventually trying to dig it up. So I did the only thing a foundation can do when it is disrespected. I shifted. And when the foundation shifts, the house comes down. As I sit here by the lake, watching the sun dip below the tree line, I have been thinking a lot about the word provider. Society tells men that our value lies in what we can give. We are told to work hard to earn, to sacrifice, to be the shield and the sword. And we do it gladly. We do it because we love. But somewhere along the way, the line gets blurred. We stop being the provider and we start being the product. Vanessa didn't marry a man. She married a lifestyle. To her, I wasn't Marcus Thorne, the man who likes fishing and hates cold coffee. I was Marcus Thorne, the access pass to the country club. I was the black card that never declined. I was the safety net that allowed her to live without consequences. And Chloe. She didn't see a father figure. She saw an ATM machine that she could insult while waiting for it to dispense cash. She thought she could take the money and spit on the hand that gave it to her. It is a painful thing to realize you are being used. It starts as a whisper in the back of your mind. You ignore it. You tell yourself they are just stressed. You tell yourself that is just how modern families are. You buy the expensive gifts to try and buy their affection. But you can't buy respect. Respect is the one currency that cannot be counterfeited. The night of the birthday dinner wasn't the cause of the eviction. It was just the moment the lights came on. When Vanessa told me to stay in my lane, she didn't realize that my lane was the only thing keeping her moving forward. She thought she was the driver. She forgot she was just a passenger in a car I paid for, fueled, and insured. Looking back, I don't feel anger toward them anymore. Anger is a hot emotion. It requires energy. What I feel is a distant, cold pity. They had it all. They had safety. They had love if they had wanted it. But they traded it for an illusion. Vanessa is out there somewhere selling cheap makeup and fake dreams, trying to convince strangers she is still important. She is chasing a reflection in a mirror that shattered a long time ago. Brad is in a cell learning that in the real world you can't talk your way out of math. The numbers always catch up to you. And Chloe is serving eggs to men who look just like me, finally learning the lesson I tried to teach her for 10 years. That work has dignity. That service has value. That you are not better than the person cleaning your floor. They are living the lives they earned. And I am living the life I built. People ask me if I am lonely. They see an old man in a cabin and they think it is a tragedy. They don't see Jamal coming over on Sundays with blueprints under his arm. They don't see the letters I get from the first group of boys moving into the Eliza Thorne home. They don't see the peace that fills this room when the sun goes down. I am not lonely. I am selective. There is a difference between being alone and being at peace. Being alone is a physical state. Being at peace is a spiritual victory. I have cleared the weeds from my garden. I have pulled up the roots that were poisoning the soil. And now, for the first time in years, I can watch new things grow. Jamal is the son of my spirit. He doesn't share my blood, but he shares my code. He understands that a man's word is his bond. He understands that you don't build a legacy by taking, you build it by creating. Watching him take over the company is the greatest joy of my career. I didn't just build buildings, I built a successor. And that is a structure that will outlast any skyscraper. The lesson I want to leave you with is simple. It is about the wallet versus the man. If people only love you when the wallet is open, they don't love you. They love the transaction. They are customers, not family. And the customer is not always right. Sometimes the customer is a thief. As men, we are terrified of closing the wallet. We are afraid that if we stop paying, we will stop mattering. We are afraid that if we say no, we will be abandoned. So we keep paying. We keep tolerating the disrespect. We keep swallowing the insults because we think that being a doormat is better than being alone. I am here to tell you that is a lie. The moment I closed my wallet was the moment I got my life back. The moment I stopped paying for their affection was the moment I realized I didn't need it. True power isn't about how much money you have. True power is the ability to walk away. True power is looking at the people who depend on you and saying, "The price of my support is respect. If you cannot afford that price, then you cannot afford me." It is a terrifying thing to do. It feels like jumping off a cliff. But I promise you, you won't fall. You will fly. You will realize that the weight you were carrying wasn't keeping you grounded, it was holding you down. I look at my hands. They are old hands. They have scars. They have spots. But they are clean. They are free. They are no longer holding up a facade. They are holding a fishing rod. They are holding a cup of coffee. They are holding the future. My name is Marcus Thorne. I am not a wallet. I am not a bank account. I am a builder. And the most beautiful thing I ever built was my own freedom. To anyone listening who feels like they are just a paycheck to the people in their house, I want you to look in the mirror. Ask yourself what you are buying. Are you buying love or are you paying a ransom? If you have to pay to be treated like a human being, the price is too high. Close the account, change the locks, drive to the lake. The silence might scare you at first, but eventually you will hear the most important voice of all, your own. And it will tell you that you are enough, just as you are, without the checkbook, without the title, just you. That is the peace I found, and it is waiting for you too. You just have to be brave enough to stop the transaction. Respect is a currency that takes a lifetime to earn, but only a second to lose. Marcus taught us that being a provider doesn't mean being a doormat. When you allow disrespect to sit at your table, it eventually eats your dignity. The moment his family saw him as nothing more than a bank account, they forfeited their right to his protection. True power isn't about shouting or fighting. It's about the ability to silently withdraw your support and let gravity do the rest. Never let anyone get comfortable with disrespecting you, no matter who they are. Thank you for listening to Marcus's story. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt undervalued or disrespected by the people you support, please hit that like button. It helps us share this message with more men who need to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut someone off to save your own peace? I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice and redemption. Until next time, stay strong and remember your worth.